live.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening online and also in the room for this Children's Services Overview Scrutiny Committee today on the 23rd of January 2024. And we could just ask the Democratic Services Officer to read out some housekeeping notice, please.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting of the Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by a member of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of your nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the surface car park at the front of the annex. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on then to the agenda items for this meeting. Number 1, apologies. Do we have any apologies for the meeting, please?
Yeah, we have received apologies from Councillor Olivia Brown and Mark Saxby for this meeting, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any substitute members?
Councillor Oliver Walter is substituting for Councillor Brown.
Thank you. And just for transparency and also to let the people attending this meeting, we've also joined this evening by Mr. Anthony Evans, who's the head teacher of a primary school within the BCP area. As you're aware that we sometimes bring people in for just their expertise and their view on life as it is. And so we're very grateful for Mr. Evans joining us this evening. Do we have any declarations of interest, please? Councillor Harman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have a family member that, although is not yet in receipt of an EHCP, we're about to start the process of applying. And at present, I feel fine to stay in the meeting, but if at any point during it, I will remove myself. Bear that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bull.
I have a member of my family who has an EHCP through Walworth, Christchurch Port Council, and I have dispensation to fully take part in this meeting.
Thank you. And for transparency, I also have a family member in receipt of an EHCP with BCP Council, and again, dispensation to remain with the meeting and take part in all agenda items. Thank you. So agenda item number 4, confirmation of minutes. So I don't know if everyone's had a look at the minutes. There were a couple of extra things that we were going to suggest adding to the minutes for the meeting of the 6th of November. So minute number 34, safety valve programme, with 2 further bullet points to be added to the committee discussion as follows. Chair stressed the importance of completing an equality impact assessment and consultation with respect to the Brown principles. And in response to concern about meeting the requirements set out in the agreement against meeting statutory responsibilities of the council, the committee was advised of consequences of not fulfilling the agreement, which included withholding funding. However, it stressed that officers would continue to meet their statutory duties. Subject to the above, and unless anyone indicates otherwise, can we assume, therefore, that committee agrees to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th and the 21st of November 2023 is an accurate record with these additions added to the minutes for the 6th? Show of hands. Thank you. It's fine. So action sheet, unless anyone indicates otherwise, we assume that the committee agrees to note the action sheet which tracks decisions, actions and outcomes arising from the previous committee meetings. And number 5, public issues. Are there any public issues for this meeting, please?
Just to read out a short notice before we carry on with the public issues. Due to the large number of public issues received, the Chair has agreed to an extension of the time for this item. It may be that you are only given an opportunity to read out your first either question or statement in accordance with BCP's constitution. In the interest of fairness, questions and statements will be heard in the order that they have been received, hopefully allowing everybody the opportunity to receive an answer to their question or read out their statement. I want to assure you that all questions and statements have been circulated to the committee for consideration prior to the meeting, and should we run out of time, any responses not provided at the meeting will form part of the formal minutes. So just to start with the... Oh, yes.
Thank you. We traditionally tend to do questions before statements. However, I've had 2 representations where some protected characteristics have been raised, and therefore I'd like to ask 2 individuals to read their statement first, just so that they can reduce their anxiety and make their statements. So, Ms. Boone, if that's okay, would you like to come up?
My name's Maisie Bourne, and here is my statement. I've been in the SEND system since September 2022. Despite my needs, SEND department don't seem to think it's necessary for me to attend an appropriate setting because I'm not worth the funding, it seems. I've been out of full-time education since January 2023. My mental health has declined. I feel worthless and no one from SEN listens to me or my feelings, despite the fact that BCP are supposed to listen to the views of the young person. You have and still are failing me. No one can answer questions when asked, and no one is accountable for decision making. Health professional reports are ignored and not actioned. My EHCP isn't followed, finalised in July 2023. Still waiting. Why is my mental health education not important to BCP SEND department? Just because I'm a child, it seems that I don't matter. Adults in employment wouldn't be expected to go through what I've had to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we've just got Will Murray, and then we'll return back to the questions as per normal.
My name is Will Murray, and here is my statement. I'm 15 and I haven't been in full-time education for 8 years. That's nearly 2/3 of my life. That's also how long we've been fighting for me to receive what every child is entitled to and what should be a given. The current provision isn't even enough now for myself and countless other young people throughout BCP. So how is it going to improve when people who have never met us make a drastic decision that will change the course of our futures, and when the already insufficient budget is cut? The idea that young people like me will be forced into a mainstream environment with teachers and teaching assistants who are inexperienced with SEND is beyond frightening. I've already experienced trauma in my life, including severe mental health problems. If I'd had to go to mainstream school, I wouldn't be here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. So the next question has been received by Sally Childs. She's asked for an officer to read out on her behalf. The question is, what qualifications do the SEN officers and managers have to allow them to remove EHCPs? Advice given by specialists without any new professional evidence. And just handing to Councillor Burton for response.
Thank you, Sally, very much for the question. And just before I start the answer, I would say that in the years I was chairing Children's ONS, one of my great wishes was to get a lot more people involved in coming to Children's ONS. I think my wish has actually been fulfilled today. I've never seen so many people in the room. I've got, hopefully I've got the right answers with the right questions, because the order has been changed. If I do start to go, yeah, do somebody let me know that I'm getting the wrong answer, the wrong question. Answering your question, Sally, all case officers are trained according to their roles and undertake independent provider of special education advice, that's IPSEA level 1 and 2 legal training. Any proposed amendments will be through an annual review process or a request to review a plan or provision. It's not uniquely a SEN case officer decision, as all parties are involved in these decisions. A decision to amend an EHCP is sent to the parent or young person with SEND, depending on age, and they have a 15-day period to respond before the EHCP is finalised, to allow for further discussion and amendments to be made. Should the local authority and family be unable to reach an agreement, there's also the option to proceed to mediation or to appeal. We are continuing to enhance our workforce development offer to ensure case officers are drafting EHCPs to the highest standard, and we are always keen to discuss any queries regarding the content of an EHCP at the earliest possible opportunity.
Thank you. And we've got the next question from Mr. Sofianis, if you'd like to come to Give us your first question.
Good evening. Oh, yeah, it's definitely loud. Good evening, everyone. I've never seen so many people here, either in the committee area or in the public area. My question is as follows. Any improvement in EHCP delivery is to be welcomed, and families experiencing a better service will be grateful. The concern is how far these improved statistics reported are due to an increase in refusals. Council is currently under the Delivering Better Value programme, which has an objective to suppress EHCP numbers. Indeed, paragraph 2.6 of Appendix 2 seems to suggest this, with almost half of support requests in September being refused. Can Council please confirm the following? The percentage of requests being refused assessment so far this academic year, and the equivalent percentage for the 2022-23 academic year, and the total number of cases proceeding to mediation and those proceeding to appeal, and the relative increase compared to 2022-23. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again, Mr. Sofianos, for your question. And first of all, I apologise. I am tending to use first names, but I don't actually have your first name in front of me. So I'm calling you Mr. Sofianos for no other reason than I just don't have that information. So far this academic year, September to December 2023, 53.4% of educational health and care EHCP assessment requests have been declined / refused. This equates to 124 declines out of 232 requests. Now, the next bit answers a table. I'll go through the data, but when you get it as a written answer, probably easier to follow. So this is September 23, October 23, November 23, December 23 in that order. Number of requests for EHC assessment, 41, 36, 95, 60. The number of EHC assessments agreed to initiate goes 21, 24, 32, 31. And the percentage of decisions to proceed with assessment of need being made within 6 weeks goes 93.2%, 96.7%, 93.2%, 85.2%. During the same period in the previous academic year, that's September to December 22, an average of 5.9% of requests were meeting the 6-week decision to initiate assessment timeframe, evidencing that the service was dealing with a request backlog. Due to the backlog figure, we are currently investigating the state of play in 2022 so that we can provide a like-for-like comparison and will provide a return accordingly. Again, I've got a table here. So this goes September 22, October 22, November 22, December 22. Number of requests for EHC assessment goes 50, 54, 61, 75. Number of EHC assessments agreed to initiate 42, 86, 84, 61. Percentage of decisions to proceed with assessment of needs being made within 6 weeks, 0%, 16.7%, 5.5%, 1.4%. During the calendar year 2022, there was a total of 82 mediations, out of which 3 cases were followed up by appeals. In 2023, there was a total of 166 mediations, an increase of 102% from 2022. Looking at the appeals data in 2022, there were 3 appeals that followed mediation compared to 13 in 2023, a 333% increase.
Sorry, can I just request that I get all that in writing as a follow-up?
Yes, the everything will be sent to you.
Thank
in
you, very
writing,
kind.
and will be available with the minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Thank you.
So the next statement has come from Sarah Clark, who isn't with us this evening, so I'll be reading out on her behalf. I'm a grandma to 2 children with EHCPs. One has complex speech disorder. We fought hard for SALT provisions, including LGSCO, tribunals, complaints, hours of studying standards and send law, and dozens of emails, all to secure crucial SALT provision for a child with significant needs. It shouldn't have been that hard. The impact of his disorder being neglected is that his self-esteem plummeted. Aged 5, he started self-harming, hitting his head over and over again. The balance system is championed as a means to ensure equitable distribution of NHS capacity. In reality, it means the children most in need have provisions capped by a blanket policy. It denied him essential support. It is a huge concern that there is such a reliance on health provision sought in the SV plan when they already are not meeting the needs of those most in need. The stakes are too high. And then we've received the next question from Pearl McCarthy, who's going to be coming to read her question out.
Hello, I'm Pearl McCarthy. I'm here on behalf of Parent Carers Together, who is the official Parent Carer Forum for Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, and is the strategic partner of BCP Council. With relation to agenda item 10, as the rights of our children in law will not change, how will BCP Council ensure that they adhere to the law while also reducing the number of EHCPs issued and placing fewer children into specialist settings?
Okay, thank you, Bill, very much for your question, and nice to see you again. All children will continue to be assessed through the statutory process. However, it is hoped that stronger support and use of graduated response and early intervention systems will see a reduction in need of assessment over time. Through our capital bid aligned with our safety valve proposal and the development of new and new and differentiated inclusion work with schools, we will seek to increase the mainstream places, e.g. resource-based provision. These special places will be at lower cost than independent special placements. We have workshop planned to work through the development of provision with schools.
We've received the next question from Steve McCarthy, who was having someone to read it on his behalf. If you'd like to come up. Yep. So his question is, why have you failed to uphold your legal obligations and follow your own BCP policy by not carrying out any equalities impact statements, failing to consult and failing to adhere to the Brown's principle?
Thank you, Steve, for the question. I'm afraid this one is quite a short answer. It is, should an agreement be reached, the local authority will create an implementation plan, and this will include an equalities impact assessment.
So we've had the next statement from Amy Sherman. Okay.
In the last meeting, you stated you will introduce earlier intervention for children who require it. However, after having 3 children with SEND go through mainstream, we know this is already supposed to be in place, funded by the allocated SEND budget given to schools. The level of intervention is not possible already within the school's current budget, let alone with further cuts. This already has a detrimental effect on our children and young people's education and mental health. We know that early intervention can prevent needs escalating to the point of needs in the HCP. How will the local authority provide the necessary therapeutic intervention if school budgets are cut further, with no guarantee from health services that they can increase this provision?
Thank you, Amy, very much for your question. The safety valve proposal includes a £2.8 million additional funding for schools to provide support through outreach and inclusion, but this is dependent on the contribution of mainstream school being at the level set out in the dedicated school grant plan. In addition, we are working with health colleagues to discuss the therapeutic support strategies for schools and their children. Workshops are currently planned with schools to discuss options for developments of these approaches, and we will take the learning from national best practice.
The next question is from Rachel Filmer. If you'd like to come up and ask a question.
Thank you. In two separate meetings, I have heard officers criticise too many parents for making applications for EHC needs assessments directly to BCP. It is made very difficult for schools to apply despite the legal threshold. You are averaging 41 weeks to issue a plan, twice as long as the legal timeframe, and if a parent needs to appeal, a hearing date can take a year. That is more than 2 years of delay while children struggle and placements break down, often after years of struggle. Rather than shifting blame to parents, how will BCP improve this process and reduce these delays so that parents do not feel they must apply themselves?
Thank you very much, Rachel, for this question. I don't believe officers intended to criticise parents applying for EHCPs. The data just indicates that we are an outlier compared with other local authorities in this area. Whenever an outlier is encountered, it is highlighted and the reasons that it exists need to be explored. We are curious why that would be. We have made improvements to the timeliness of both new assessments and are working to address the number that are outstanding. 182 assessments, including 23 after tribunal appear, waiting 20 plus weeks. We will continue to focus on improving outcomes and providing better support for our children and families. Now again, I've got some data here, which is a table, so when you get it in writing, it'll be easier to follow, but I will read out what it says. So this is, I've got only two columns. This one is December 22 and December 23 data. So the percentage of decisions to proceed with assessments of needs being made within 6 weeks was 1.4%, and now it is 95.2%. The percentage of new EHCPs issued within 20 weeks, including exceptions, was 1.2% and now is 12.2%. That is up to December. I would add to that, there was a time from January 23 to August 23 that it actually was at 0%. So the 1.2 is an average. Average time and weeks taken to complete new EHCP assessments, data requests to issue of the final EHCP, 41.8 to 36.7. And the percentage of requests for educational psychologists, EP advice, where EP responded within 6 weeks from the date of request from the LA, the local authority, of 4.3% in 22 to 94.1 in 23.
So we've received the next question from Rebecca Gannon, who's asked me to read it out on her behalf. The question is, how will safety valve mitigate the long-term cost and the damage caused to children who are pushed into mainstream settings which cannot meet their needs, causing further financial damage to BCP?
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for your question. This is another one of the short answer ones, I'm afraid. Children's needs will continue to be met according to the Educational Health and Care Needs Assessment and Education Health and Care Plans.
So the next question has come from Sarah Murray. She said she was here to read out her question if you wanted to come forward.
I am hearing repeatedly of children with extremely complex speech and language needs being limited to a very minimal level of provision on the basis of equity under the balance system. If SALT have to resort to such measures, how can schools and parents believe that children will receive the speech and language therapy they require?
Thank you very much for this question, Sarah. Now, you probably realise that the answers to these questions I get considerable help from officers formulating them. I'm still waiting for the response from our health colleagues to help me answer this question. So I don't at this moment have an answer, but you will get an answer forwarded to you by email, and it will add to the minutes when I'm able to achieve that. Chair, I would ask, because Sarah has got several questions, and I'm feeling very bad that this is her first question. And I know there is an answer later on. If there is the time, could we bump her up slightly to, so that I do get at least to answer some of her questions.
I think I'm already in trouble for not listening to the Constitution, but if you're going to encourage me to be naughty tonight, that's the night.
The Constitution is sometimes overrated.
Okay, so we've received the next statement from Anthony Evans. If you wanted to read out your statement.
I'm Anthony Evans. I'm a primary head teacher in Bournemouth. My statement relates to exclusions. Primary head teachers do not want to be suspending or permanently excluding pupils. They do so with heavy heart and necessity to offset the pressure of staff retention, the disruption and harm to other children, and the hope that such measures will allow reflection and change in pupil behaviour. But as heads, we are all dealing with significantly challenging behaviour post-COVID. We've all been hit, punched, kicked and spat at, and we need help and clear pathways of support and quality provision. It feels as though some of these things only kick in when the child has been permanently excluded.
So we've received the next statement from Kerry Friend, who isn't here tonight, so I'll be reading out on her behalf. The whole idea of the safety valve action plan terrifies me. With a child who has been totally failed by the school system due to not enough resources, how can it be right to reduce the resources that are already not fit for purpose? Mainstream schools do not have the resources or staff to cope with the amount of children with SEN needs. I can take years to get any form of help. We sought for so long, countless meetings, emails, phone calls, all which cost somebody, and all for nothing. Still no support 4 years later due to resources. We're not the only ones, and now you want to cut the resources more. All you will get in the few years is a huge amount of adults with SEN needs with more being failed, and in turn will even more support in later years and more resources needed. Then the next statement has been received by Bob and Jeannie Francis, who wanted to come up and read their statement. If you wanted to come forward.
Hello. We're grandparents to 3 SEN children, all with the HCPs, and 2 of them have places in maintained specialists. We've been battling this system for 14 years to get the support they need. They, alongside all children of school age, are the heart of the safety valve programme. Every parent, carer of a school age child should be worried about this. Your child won't cope with mine. Mine will not cope with yours. Teachers won't cope with the number of SEN children and are now being incorporated into mainstream. Teachers have not had the training to cope with children who can be mute, have learning difficulties, flap their hands, screech and scream, bang their heads in frustration, aggressive and swear. Our already overstretched teachers won't have time to provide the support our children need. BCP will be handling more than double the amount of appeals. At what cost? They already have an abysmal poor rate of success. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've received the next statement from Sarah Cooper, who isn't able to be here tonight, so I'll be reading it out on her behalf. I have two sons, both with EHCPs, that were a fight for from reception until year 3. Eldest son is now in a specialist independent school out of county. This was our parental preference, the only school that could meet his needs. We had to go to tribunals after mainstream secondary failed, due to BCP not listening to us about the type of placement he needed, further damaging his mental health and ours. Youngest son is in phase transfer year, and I've just submitted appeals paperwork. It's the same scenario. BCP, listen to parents. You are damaging children's mental health by having them in the wrong settings. We need more ASD/CSEMH schools that are not like Ilford Academy, but designed for autistic children, not just children that have been excluded. The safety valve is going to destroy more children's mental health by forcing them into the wrong setting. And then the next statement we've received is from Teresa Brown. Again, she wanted me to read it out on her behalf. My 15-year-old grandson has complex mental health issues and autism. He has effectively lost about 3 years of schooling and now has a patchy and precarious arrangement with the tutors. Twice weekly, while he attempts to manage 4 GCSEs, he has been left anxious and lacking in confidence by his educational experiences to date. Without my daughter's full-time commitment, despite her own health issues, to navigate the complex local authority network and processes, my grandson would not even have had his minimal educational input throughout his secondary school years. The safety valve proposal does not acknowledge the many and varied complex needs of the individual children from whom integration within mainstream schooling is not an option. The focus should rather be on resourcing individual needs, whereas this proposal is a blatant resourceless measure. And then we've got the next statement, who's asked me to read it out. Yeah. I think we'll stop. Okay, just bear with us 2 moments.
So I think we've just overrun our extended time. Was supposed to be 15 minutes. We've gone over the 30 minutes we'd allowed, and I think everyone in the room tonight has been offered the opportunity to speak at least once. I'd just like to thank once again everybody who's taken the time to contact Democratic Services, take the time to submit their questions, and also to come here this evening. It's very good to see you all. Thank you. So we're going to just swap the agenda around, because I imagine it's probably the next item agenda, or what was towards the end is the reason why everyone is here in the room this evening. So we thought it'd probably be prudent, and not to keep you here too long, is to bring the safety valve programme update from Miss Kathy Hadley forward now. So
thank you,
Sally.
Chair. Just to say, we submitted the plan as set out in the previous ONS paper, the 15-year plan to the DfE. We have been informed that we're not receiving any feedback against that plan until the end of February. We also submitted a capital plan which relates to the capacity building that we need and has been pointed out by some people that have spoken this evening, and we will not receive a feedback from that until the end of March.
So can you just clarify what you mean by feedback? Will that be, so I think what the question will be, at what point do you agree an agreement? Is that pre-feedback, post-feedback? Where does that sit with the timelines of end of February, end of March?
When I relate to a feedback, I mean, we've received an email saying, thank you very much for your plan. We will come back to you on our decision of whether we think we would like to offer you against that plan by the end of February. And in terms of our capital bid, again, thank you very much for that. We will review that and we will come back to you by the end of March. And I have no further information than that.
It looks like Miss Barrett wants to say something.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, it's just really just to put the context around that, because I know that there's a number of challenges to the process, but discontent with the process. And I just wondered if it's just worth rehearsing the sort of the summary of the position that we have, which is that DfE has defined a service that we have to provide statutorily that we don't have the budget for. They've given us a budget, and the budget is too small for the scale of the service, which is partly because demand is rising. It's partly because the costs are rising. There's a number of factors around that, and therefore we have an ongoing deficit. I just want to remind members and potentially members of the public as well that at the moment we are spending as a council something like £20 million a year more than we have in the budget for providing this service. And with any of our other services, what that would result in would be we'd have to cut somewhere else because we have to balance our budget. For this one, the government has done what they call a statutory set aside. And it is just worth reminding ourselves of the words of that statutory set aside, if I can, which is what they've said is that where the local authority is in deficit on its annual budget, it must not charge that to a revenue account. So we cannot pay for it from the normal budget. It must charge the amount of the deficit to an account established, charged and used solely for the purpose of recognising the deficit. So we have to hold that off the balance sheet. So we are spending £20 million on the service, more than we have by way of money from the government to provide the service, and we're not allowed to charge it to the council tax. So we stick it in an offshore account effectively, and that set aside is time limited. So government has put a time limit on it of the 31st of March 2026, by which time we expect that total deficit to be something in the order of £100 million in round numbers. We don't have enough money in our reserves to pay for that if that comes back as a council debt. What government did is it started out with delivering better value and said to us, come and have a talk to us. We've got some national experts. Newton Europe will come and look at how we can help you to reduce your costs and get them down below the budget or in line with the budget. And actually they then said, we can't do it. You know, within 5 years, we can't do it. So they then put us in or invited us to join the safety valve, which is a discussion with government about a plan to sort out the budget. Okay. We have said that we are not going to take part, or we are not going to make a proposal with something we do not believe we can deliver. And that means we will not support a proposal that takes the service below the statutory requirements. Okay. And we will not sign up to a service that we don't believe is deliverable. Therefore, the only solution we've been able to come up with is a 15-year plan, which requires 2 big slugs of capital investment from government to make new provision to reduce not necessarily the numbers or the type of delivery, but the cost of that delivery. That's what we've proposed in our 15-year plan. The informal feedback we've had from DfE's technical and expert advisors is, yeah, that seems reasonable. We don't think there's a better way of doing it. So it's not as if the council is saying we can't do it, we're not going to do it. We said, right, what's the best way we can do it? So that is what has gone to government. They will give us a formal response to that. And I'm just a bit worried that people are saying, you know, what, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. We've just said to government, this is a plan that would work, takes 15 years, meets our statutory requirements, meets the service requirements, and would balance the budget. Now, that's in 15 years' time, the budget would balance. In the meantime, we continue to build up a deficit, which by that time is over £200 million. We have to persuade the Department for Education to pay for that, because the council does not have £200 million set aside. And in fact, we wouldn't be allowed to have £200 million set aside for this. So I just wanted to put that context around it, because when we say when's the response coming, we will get an official response. They may well come back to us in the meantime and ask further questions. I do expect them to challenge our numbers. I do expect them to say, why can't you? But we have said as a team, in entering that negotiation, we will do it with integrity, and we will not allow or support a proposal that requires us to go below the statutory services or in a way that we believe damages the services. So I wanted to make that commitment, because I think there are a number of misleading, if you like, interpretations of what's going on. We are negotiating, we have submitted something. We believe that it is a plan that has integrity, that can be delivered. But so far, all the safety valve discussions have all resulted in a 5-year deal that other councils have signed up to, which I know they are now struggling to meet because demand is rising and they are having to undermine the levels of statutory provision. And we have said we are not going to do that. Whatever comes back from DfE will have to go to full council for approval. if we believe it's something we can recommend. So again, just assurance, councillors of course will be involved in that decision because it will be more than £1 million and the delegations that would have to go to council. So I thought that might be helpful in the debate because I'm not sure that's all been said in one place at one time. And I think it just puts the context for councillors about, well, is this a dangerous negotiation? Are we being forced into it? We're not forced into anything. We're having a negotiation and we'll see what they say to our plan. I thought that might be helpful, Chair.
No, it absolutely was. It was, it's interesting because you say there's a lot of myths and stories out there. I think the only problem is that the only information that people have had has either been through these meetings or through press releases. And actually no one has come and spoken to any of the parties involved, parents or teachers, etc. So I can understand why they perhaps think, or why they're trying to take together the information that they have, leading to what I think you've called misleading information. On that, does anyone have any questions at this moment? So Councillor Cooper and then Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you. It's almost like being thrown into a deep dark lake with tanks on your back with no air, and has to do a deep dive and solve the problem. I don't think there is anything about myths here. You know, we've had, and it's not been political. This is about political economy and fiscal management. We've had 13 years of cuts to local authority budgets. They are now impacting massively on local authorities' services that they can deliver. At the same time, social policy has been changed through the different departments of education, environment, and transport, you name it. And all those social housing, the housing crisis, all those things are beginning to impact, and local authorities are not kitted up. So I'm kind of thinking we need to be saying, well, this is just not good enough. It's not good enough to be asked to do a job and not have the money to do it. It's like if I was a builder and you say, "Oh, build me a house." It's going to cost £1 million.
Sorry? Is there a question in this?
Yeah, but it's okay. But my question is, when are we going to raise our voices, the local authorities and schools, and say it's not good enough? We've been asked to do a job that we can't do without the money.
Okay, I'm not sure who that question is to. I know the MPs have been written to, and I know that
It's the central government.
So yeah, absolutely. Conor Burns has raised this at MP level, as have other MPs. On to that, so Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to get some clarity on the actual submission itself, because we've heard statements around the kind of the myths and the contradictory statements, some of which have been directed at me as well, which is why I actually went back to the last meeting that we were at and wrote down the words that we used in that meeting. So the words that we used in that meeting was that a submission has been put to the Department for Education based on scenario 2 over a 15-year cycle, and that as part of that, a proposal has been taken to the schools forum for a 10 to 11% top slice for next year. And now, Chair, this then generated a discussion for the rest of the meeting, and if I may, some of the anguish and worry that we've been hearing from the schools. Now, we've since had communication from the council that has refuted that statement and said that the 11% was never really a proposal and was only an illustrative example. But of course, that's not what we heard in the meeting, and I don't think that's what the school forum heard as well. So I suppose the big question I've got in that submission that has been put forward is what is that top slice that is being proposed as part of our plan? And if it is different from the 10 to 11%, why not? I suppose clearly why have we moved, because it must be a better situation, but why did we get into such a mess that we were told in one meeting that it was a proposal and then in another that it wasn't?
Would you like Mr. Frank to answer that, or Ms. Hadley? Who's stuck to that?
So in terms of the submission that was in the past paper, ONS, it actually set out that the scenario included the maximum schools block contribution of 0.5% each year.
Just to add to that, the wording that is in the actual submission reads as follows. The original submission included an illustrative scenario to request this through the school block transfer at an average of 6%, which would erase the need for a DfE contribution. It was an illustrative scenario. We cannot make a decision to take 11% from the school's budget. We could propose it. Schools, I think, pretty clear about where they would be, and I think that councillors would be pretty clear about where they would be if we asked schools to take an 11% budget cut. The person that could make that decision is the Secretary of State for Education. They are the only people that have the power to do that. They can override the schools forum and they can override council. We have put it in as an illustrative scenario to demonstrate what would happen if that deficit were to be funded from the school's budget, which is the only other legal budget that we could see that it could be funded from, because the DfE statutory set aside says that we cannot fund it from the council. So under those rules, the only other place it could come from is the schools block. The DfE Secretary of State has that power. We've included it as an illustrative scenario, if that's helpful.
That's really helpful, and actually, because it's back to that myth busting, isn't it? Because obviously we've got a press statement in the last week given by Councillor Burton, where he talks about proposals to the schools forum, and one of those proposals was an 11% transfer from school budgets. We've obviously heard the words that Miss Hadley used on the 3rd of October, and then from emails from schools, it talks about the proposed levels of top slicing are 11%. So you can understand the amount of concern that this has caused and why it's caused that concern, because there's been some difficulties and perhaps a little bit carelessness with the language if that wasn't what you were proposing to have put it in that way. Councillor Broadhead, did you want to come back?
And I think we probably need to move on, but I think that was a really helpful summary from the chief executive, that it was an illustrative example of what you could do to get rid of the deficit in year. That is not what we heard before, and I think that's why it has been so very confusing, and I wished we'd had that clarity before. And I think we now just need to wait and hear back from government about what their feedback will be. I've just got one more question, which is around the
Apologies. To that matter, that
it was that matter, because I want to be sort of clear with anything that I've said to the press or in several interviews that I've had this week. I've never said that there's going to be 11% removed from schools. In fact, I think in one interview I would say probably I use the term over my dead body would be what I actually said. I've always made very clear that this was for illustrative purposes. I've also been very clear that schools would not and could not cope with that. And therefore, I'm not quite sure which release you were saying, that there may be a word not missed from there. I'm not sure, but I'll be very interested to see where you got that information from.
I'll send it to you. It's in the echo this week. Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you. And I think if anybody wants to hear, they can watch the last meeting. At the beginning introduction, I think it was pretty clear what most people took out of that. But moving on, the chief exec talks about the kind of democratic input that we will have in this process, and this was pretty clear in the last couple of recommendations, I think, that have come from this committee, that this is a potential decision. Now, we've heard the strength of public opinion and from the schools that is of such importance with the service provision of some of our most vulnerable, that of course as elected councillors we really should have a say in that process. So I understand the chief exec's technical point that any capital decision that we take that's over £1 million, by the very nature of what's written in the constitution, has to come to full council. But the question I would ask, and the question that we've asked again and again, is aside from the vote on the capital side, will we have a presentation and a vote in full council on the entirety of the proposals of the safety valve in its entirety?
Brian, you look like you want to answer that one.
So just because I don't think I referred specifically to the capital, it's about budget matters that are of that scale. So this could be revenue budget, it could be capital. It's not just the capital that would have to come to members. The members' decision making, we have an executive cabinet and we have a council meeting. It would come to the appropriate mechanism, which I'm assuming, because there's a scale of the likely financial settlement, would almost certainly have to come to full council. I can't see any way that it wouldn't do, but I just say it would come to the appropriate members forum. You know that in scrutiny, look at cabinet decisions beforehand, cabinet then makes a recommendation, through to council meetings, there will be plenty of opportunity for that to be discussed and for members in the appropriate forum to take whichever decisions there are. There'll be some service decisions, presumably, which could be taken by cabinet. There'll be some budget decisions, which, given the scale, will. I can't see any way that it wouldn't be a council meeting, a council decision.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased to hear that commitment. The one caveat I would say is that sometimes these decisions come with quite a short timeline. I know one of our neighbouring councils, that decision was taken by the chief execs, I think delegated powers ahead of a formal decision-making process. So as long as we do get that that sight and that input at full council, I'm really appreciative of the clarity. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, that's interesting because I didn't take very much clarity from it, actually. Sorry, Graham. No, I didn't. I got assuming that if X, Y, and Z is in place. So I think what I'm asking is, regardless of all that, given the amount of interest, the public interest in this, the fact that it affects so many wards and so many people, before you sign any agreement with DFE, will it come to full council for councillors to A, debate and B, vote on?
I can't see that there would be an offer from DFE that wouldn't require that, because it would have to be so small or so far in advance that it can go into the budget and therefore go through the cabinet process. But then the cabinet budget, of course, would come to the council. So yes, I think I could be pretty clear there will be an opportunity for this to be discussed at full council, because it would either be in the budget paper or it would be in a standalone paper. I can't see any way around that. I'm looking at Janie, she's nodding at me. Yes, I think we can give a commitment that it would come to council before it would be agreed. I don't think this is a decision that would be taken under delegated powers by the chief executive.
I think the trouble is it's happened in so many other councils where it has. If I move on, one for yourself, the monitoring officer. So one of the things that we've obviously talked about is quality impact assessments. And we heard today that we'll create an implementation plan, which will then include the quality impact assessment. But we've read statements again in the press and on sort of the FAQs, etc., that have been put out last night, that this will be implemented without a detriment to support needed for our young persons, and that the quality of education remains our absolute priority. The trouble is, if we have not done the EIA already and we do it once a decision has been made, and it appears that that decision has been made, we're not only failing to comply with our own policy, namely 6.4, but also the elements of 6.4 in our policy are drawn from both case law and explain the minimum requirements to meet the public sector quality duty. And that is quite explicit in as much as you do the EIA to inform the decision making and the policy options before making a final decision. And the equality duty cannot be satisfied by applying a duty afterwards just to justify the decision that's already been taken. And what's being proposed is we're going to make a decision. We've made a proposal to DFE, and once we start to implement that, that's when we carry out EIA. And it's actually saying it's the other way around. So can you just clarify what advice you have given to the council in terms of legal obligations, and can you also clarify whether or not the council are at risk if they proceed in the way that they are doing?
Chair, I've not had the opportunity to give very detailed advice on an equality impact assessment, simply because I've not been at the council long enough to be part of all of the entirety of the discussions. However, I am confident that Kathy and her team have considered from the initial outset that there will be a need for an equality impact assessment. An equality impact assessment, in my professional opinion, is an evolving living document. So it's not a standalone document. It doesn't stand still. It doesn't have a end point, if I may say that. And so there is time to inform an equality impact assessment at any point up to this. And one must be completed when a response is given back from the DFE, because Kathy and colleagues and Graham and myself and other members of the corporate management team have an absolute responsibility to review that equality impact assessment in the round of all of the protected characteristics. As the monitoring officer as well, I cannot support a decision of this fundamental nature that the chief executive has outlined, in terms of it is likely to be in excess of £1 million. It is likely to incur the decision making of council. That is not supported by an equality impact assessment. And an equality impact assessment is a toolkit which informs decision making. It's not one that dictates decision making, it purely informs. It assesses the protected characteristics and it indicates whether there's a negative impact, a neutral impact, a positive impact, and where necessary, it forces those who draft it and those who are consulted on it to think about mitigating circumstances which can lower the negative impact, if there is one, for example. If the details, as Graham's already outlined, this may be contained within the budget report. The budget is supported by an equality impact assessment, and that will be referenced in that. If it's part of the budget report, that will also then trigger a separate equality impact assessment to support this individual element of decision making. My advice is that when we get to the point of decision making at full council, all elected members as decision makers must have due regard to their public sector equality duty, and in doing so must have read the equality impact assessment that is available at that particular time, because it is members who are decision makers and officers here are advisors. So my view is that the equality impact assessment may be in some form at the moment, is being formulated, is being compiled, but at the time when a decision is to be made, that living document will be as updated and as detailed as possibly can be to enable members to make that decision at that critical point in time that Graham, Chief Executive, has already referenced.
Okay, thank you. I think you may just well have skirted the bit about in the development of policy options and before making a final decision, which of course is that end proposal. And Councillor Burton, you did state that actually you'll be creating an EIA on the implementation plan. Could you explain that a little bit more, please? It was tonight in response to one of the questions.
So could you just repeat it again?
That we will, when they asked about the EIA, you said that you will create the EIA when you've created the implementation plan and carry that out.
Yeah.
So I just wondered whether you've actually started it already or whether it's yet still work to be done once the implementation plan's been drawn up.
Okay. Personally, I haven't started it because, of course, that isn't my role. The information I'm getting is it will be started at that point, but not at the moment. I'm just going to turn to officers just to check that what I'm saying is correct.
As my colleague Janie says, the EIA is a living document. We don't know what the DfE agreement will or won't be. Some of the work against an EIA will be against the decisions or the offer they come back with. And so at the point that comes forward and it's taken to council for a decision, then an EIA will accompany that, because at that point the offer will be on the table, but a decision to accept it will not have been made.
Okay, yeah, I think we're forgetting that development of policy options again. In terms of where, Ms. Hadley, you've said that it'll be, you've provided that reassurance, which is really good to see, about it being implemented without a detriment to support needed for our young persons. And then obviously, Councillor Burton said in terms of the quality of their education remains an absolute priority. So when we were here on the 3rd, there'd been no work completed at the point to understand the outcomes of some of the work that we'd seen in other authorities. We'd looked at the budget implications, we'd looked at the 6% versus the 11%, but we hadn't actually looked at the outcomes of any persons with SEND and what the impact was on them. So what work have you done since that point in order to be sure and to provide that reassurance that the proposal you have put forward can be carried out without a detrimental impact to support which is needed for our young persons?
Okay, I might need some clarity in terms of the question, because I'm not sure whether you're asking for a national research piece that looks at the outcomes for children and young people that have all been subject to a safety valve, or whether you're asking that against the plan that's gone to the DfE whether I have done a research piece on what the impact would be. We have in the paper that you received in the last ONS set out some of the assumptions that we made and some of the risks against that. Obviously, there will be further work in terms of that, and through the EIA and other work. We have consulted and we have had some conversations with head teachers through Schools Forum, through our head teachers breakfast meetings. We are beginning to have conversation in terms of parent carer forums, and so there will be a number of opportunities for us to review that going forward.
So is there, I'm well aware, sorry, I'm just taking over the questions. I just really need to get this bit here, because this is where I think a lot of the fear is driven from. Will there be a particular piece of work in any of the measures that you put in place which will measure that the outcomes and the impact it will have on young people to ensure that it's not detrimental at any point? Because that's the bit that I'm just not getting.
Okay, so in terms of the impacts and outcomes, anything that we will do will have clear performance indicators that we will actually set out, because we will want to ensure that anything that we do will have a positive and a good outcome for children and young people and their families.
So I'm just well aware I completely took the floor then. I'm very sorry. Just needed to make sure that we have got those basics in place, because they're the things that are coming forward to me in terms of emails and concerns from parents. Is there anything else from Councillor Waters?
Yeah, just a question. I know that Bournemouth MP Conor Burns met with Gillian Keegan to discuss this matter on the 18th of January. I'm wondering if any officers have heard from him as to the feedback from that meeting and what help we can expect from him off the back of it.
We've heard nothing and had no conversation with Conor Burns.
Could I kindly ask how much we've asked for in terms of capital and deficit contributions?
4.8 million.
And also, just for my misunderstanding, but does the 15-year plan pay off the historic 63 million pound deficit?
It balances the budget.
It doesn't. It pays off.
At the end.
Sorry, Chair, I don't think we've answered that question. I didn't think it did pay off the deficit. I think effectively the agreement with that plan looks to DfE to pay off the deficits. But Nicola, you would have the facts.
No, the 15-year plan balances the in-year position over the 15 years. So at the end of 15 years, the income we receive annually is sufficient to manage the expenditure we need. Doesn't tackle the deficit currently projected for the end of this financial year.
Thank you.
So last question from Councillor Bull.
It's probably been answered already, but I'm trying to work out in my head what the alternative is. If the proposals come back from the DfE and we say, no, this is ridiculous, we can't accept them, do we then just declare 114 and that's that job done, or what?
I'm sure finance colleagues would have a more technical answer, but my view would be no. We would have to look at whether the council can balance the budget. So if safety valve does not work and we assume that the statutory set aside is removed, then we have a big chunk of money that is outstanding, which potentially could fall on the council's balance sheet. We would have to question, how can we balance the balance sheet? That might include selling assets. It might include making cuts in services. It might include other services. It might include asking government for a capitalisation direction, which is permission to capitalise in order to repay. There's a whole range of things in there. Some of those might require a section 114 notice before they could be triggered. Others might have a conversation. So I don't fall naturally on, okay, the answer is issue a section 114, because the answer is we have to balance the budget. There are various mechanisms for doing that. They would all be extremely painful, not just for services in this area, but for services across the board that are provided by the council. So I'm hoping we don't get there. Government knows that we are one of the councils that has the biggest deficit with lowest reserves to balance it. There are many other councils that have bigger deficits, but they have reserves, not necessarily enough to cover it, but they have some reserves in there. We don't have that. And therefore we would be in possibly the most precarious position, or one of the most precarious positions. But I don't believe that naturally says, therefore, a section 114. We'd have to explore the other options first. It probably would result in a section 114 notice being issued as we stand, but it just depends what other government grant is available, what other funding is available, what the funding position is, where we are on council tax income and all of that. If it was today, then we would have to come to the council and say, these are your options. Do you want to make these cuts, or find other ways to balance it? We would probably, if it were today, ask for a capitalisation direction to capitalise it and pay it off over so many years. And if that were approved, that would require a smaller level of cuts, but over a longer period.
So I'll come back, Chair. So we're in a position now where we're unable to do everything we would like to do anyway as a council. We're making cuts, we're reducing the things we're doing, we're in a budget squeeze. For whatever reason, you know, our reserves have been, I always use a phrase there which would be inappropriate, but they've been wasted, or they've been used. So we can't rely on them. It seems to me that we're very much stuck with whatever the DfE say. I mean, if we say no, it's not good enough, then I can't see how we're not reaching our what we're not doing what we need to do on the climate emergency. We're not doing what we need to on keeping the streets clean. We're not doing what we need to do on all sorts of areas. So I don't see. It feels like we're in this position where we accept it, or we're yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to bring Kathy, but I don't agree with that, because it is ultimately our choice as to whether we accept whatever the DfE offer. And at the moment, of course, there is the statutory, the set aside. Now, you know, the big challenge is, can government afford to not extend that because of the number of councils that have been in financial problems? We've had reassurances from deluxe civil servants that government is fully aware of the implications of that date. I have to say, if they'd chosen a different date, like the 1st of April 26 instead of the 31st of March, it would have given us an extra year to think about it. Because the fact that it is the last day of the financial year means that when we are declaring the budget 13 months before that, the Section 151 officer has to declare that, you know, yes, we have a balanced budget for the entire year. And if that statutory set aside has not been extended 13 months before its end date, it will look like the very last day of the financial year we will not have a balanced budget, and therefore we have to deal with it 13 months earlier. If they'd gone for the 1st of April, it could have been right up, you know, it could have been a year later. But I think we are in a position where DfE will take a view about our proposal. We are in no worse position than we are today if they say no, because today we are reliant on the statutory set aside. That's the reality of our financial position as a council, isn't it? I don't know whether, Kathy, if you want to come in on the services, and whether Nicola would like to add anything in terms of finance.
Just ask one more question, unrelated to that, but more to do with our relations with health and education. What conversations are we having with them at the moment? Because it doesn't sound to me like health has signed up to it. The schools are certainly not signed up to it. How much time will we have to be able to talk through? If an offer comes through from DfE, will we then fast track meetings with health and education to see if they can work with us as partners, as I feel they should be already in conversation with us? Perhaps you can allay my fears and tell me they already are in conversation with us about this safety valve.
Yeah. I think we've heard very clearly today from members of the public and those with lived experience in terms of the service delivery and the impact and outcomes that they've had. We are very aware through the written statement of action that we have that we are not delivering a service which is meeting some young people's and families' needs, and some things that we're delayed on. We are cognitive of that across the system, and so we are already in discussions with our health colleagues in the ICS. And we also are beginning to have some really fruitful conversations with our head teachers in our schools. There is much more to do in that space. However, this is supported by our sector-led improvement partner, Bedford Council, and also by the DfE. So we have a SEND improvement board, which is chaired by John Coughlin. I think we're probably number 3 into that cycle. That is attended by DfE advisors and also advisors from NHSE and our NHS colleagues and provider colleagues, and also in terms of head teacher representation on that board. So just to give some reassurance, outside of the safety valve conversation, those conversations are already beginning. So we had a question and some representation about speech and language. We all know how speech and language is extremely important for a lot of vulnerable young people. You know, those are the things that we're already beginning to have discussions with our health colleagues. We're also reviewing commissioning in terms of our CAMS. We are supporting and working with our health colleagues in terms of CAMS delivery, timeliness. And so just to reinforce, those conversations are already being had to improve the services. What if the decision from the DfE regarding the safety, there's an offer, then we will of course be discussing that through with our health and teacher colleagues, and also our parent carer forums, through which we get a really sense of the lived experience and how impactful the work that we are doing is or hasn't been.
Thank you.
I think we're just that's a good time to close that item.
Yeah, it is. It's to do with the democratic process, really. It's, we've had that, it may come to council, and we've had a really, committed group of parents turn up today. And we've had young people turn up, and we've got the members of Youth Parliament here. And I just wonder how we can incorporate those voices into any future plan in terms of the consultation and the decision-making process. And I know it sounds corny, but I'd really like to say thank you to them for turning out. Their lives are difficult enough as it is without having to come and stand out in the cold. The poorest always pay the highest price. And that is what is happening through this, this difficult situation. So could we have a commitment that we get them involved as much as we possibly can through the work of the participation team and the head teachers that turned up today? We talked about maybe forming a little bit of a unity among schools where they can start to consult and talk and come out with key themes and messages, because they're the people who know best, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, Miss Hadley.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I am going to draw that item to a close. I'm well aware we have lots and lots of people here, lots of officers. Oh, sorry, Councillor Burton, go on.
I'll put the bar. You finish what you were saying. It's just a suggest. I was going to suggest is a portfolio holders update at the end of, but my portfolio holders update is about this and the requests from the last meeting. So I was just wondering, you've shown a potentially be slightly more to the agenda tonight.
No, I think that's actually really timely. Then everyone can hear what. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Don't know if you heard that, but the portfolio holders briefing is usually at the end, but it includes some of the discussions around safety valves and commitments. And I think it's only fair, really, that whilst we're all in the room to hear it now rather than later. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair, and sorry to be messing up the agenda again for democratic services. I'm sure we can get it in order. That's at some point. Yeah, at the last meeting there was a request from this committee just to consider what future engagement can happen on receipt of any offers from the Department of Education, and consider as wide as possible member engagement in the final decision should one emerge from the Department of Education. Now, it says here I've got 2 months from the 3rd of January February to come up with that. I've got a part response which I thought would be useful now because it wasn't that long ago. So just for it, this is for members, but the members of the public will also it's quite useful to know. So the Children's Social Care Improvement Journey, there is a cross-party update this Thursday afternoon, which I believe is for leaders of the parties. So at that point there will be some input and I'm sure there'll be some questions then. We're also working on an all-member, what we're calling a show and tell session. The date for this is to be announced soon, but probably very early in February. We do have a probable date, but it being getting, we haven't confirmed everybody's going to be there, so I can't actually say what it is at the moment. Yeah, sorry, just reading my notes here. I do have a poll date here. So we need to ensure that everybody's going to be there. Any further bits to add to my answer? Of course, it isn't another children's ONS within the time frame. So any further, what I'll do is I'll get it to Democratic Services. They can email it out to add to that for the rest of the committee.
That's really helpful. Of course, we've got a live FAQs page as well, so it'd be really good to update that because obviously it's a lot of public interest. On that note, however, thank you very much everybody who's been involved and for bearing with us in a room which is normally freezing but absolutely baking tonight. We're going to take a natural pause because, like I said, we do have a lot of people here. I know there's some people who need to get home to their families. I'm sure officers who've worked a long day also need to be away. So if that's okay, we'll just take a 2-minute pause and then you can make as much noise as you like to if now's the time that you need to leave. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm just going to go straight to speech and language therapy. Thank you.
Hi, would you be able to share my presentation, please?
All right, no, sorry about that. No, we were going to rejig. I'm sorry, it hasn't been updated. It's definitely it was going to be speech language next, and then obviously we'll let you get home as well if that's okay. Thank you. I'm sorry the agenda hadn't been updated to that effect. Thank you.
That's fine. So we can't share the presentation. Okay, I'll speak to the presentation then. So apologies, I thought it would be up on the screen. So thank you very much for inviting me to come along and talk to you about the speech and language therapy service. So my name is Jill Warren. I'm the lead for children, young people and families at Dorset Healthcare. Beside me is Helen Duncan-Jordan, who has oversight of the speech and language therapy service as well. So I just wanted to just briefly talk about the service, how it's commissioned and what it is that we actually provide, to give you some context around the service offer. So we offer 4 strands within the service. So the first one is around dysphagia. So we would go into hospitals, or if you've got a baby who has got swallowing difficulties, we would do some work with the acutes around that. Babies who have structural disorders like cleft lip and palate, we would probably work with the acute trusts around putting together a plan for that child as well. We have an element of assessment around the neurodiversity assessment pathway, which sits under the paediatric department at University Hospitals Dorset. So we would play a part in the assessment. So if you've got a child with very complex needs, speech and language therapy would do an assessment of the child and also speak to the family. They would also then collate information from possibly an occupational therapist or Portage, anybody else that's working with that family, to then provide all of the information for the paediatrician or the psychiatrist to be able to make that diagnosis. So we are part of the neurodiversity assessment, but it's one element of it because it's quite a complex assessment pathway. We also offer, obviously, speech and communication needs for any child aged 0 to 19. So the statement at the bottom of our presentation, we offer a service, we're a commission service. So we're jointly commissioned from the ICS and also both local authorities. So the split is about 70% from the NHS and 30% from the local authorities jointly. So it's for children and young people from birth to their 19th birthday and young adults aged 19 to 25 with an EHCP and in further education who are resident in BCP area or Dorset Council area and have a GP that they're registered with locally. So the majority of the service is delivered through early years and mainstream schools. So that's the contract that we have currently at the moment. So we move on to slide 3. So the Berco report called 10 Years On was published in 2018. So it was a follow-up report to what they've done, obviously 10 years previous. And it really just highlights some of the long-term impact that having speech and communication difficulties can cause children and their families as well. So we'd expect 15% of children with a difficulty to achieve their expected attainment in writing, reading and maths. 20% would achieve grade 4 or above. Social, emotional and mental health, 81% will have an emotional or behavioural disorder, and the referrals into mental health services are 4 times higher for children with communication difficulty. And then put that against life chances, children with poor vocabulary are twice as likely to be unemployed in adulthood, and 60% of young offenders have low language skills. So I think we can't underestimate the impact this has on children long term. So how do we access the service? So if you've got a child with that's having some difficulty, how would you access speech and language? So there's a couple of routes into this. There's a community-based referral. So this can come through early help. It could come through like nursery or playgroups, come through family hubs, clinics where health visitors sit within that team, nursery nurses, staff nurses, GPs. So they can all put a referral under the age of 5. One of the things that has come into play with the balance system? Because I know that some people have mentioned the balance system. So phase 1 of the balance system is around this thing called Ready Steady Chat. So this is for the under 5s. They can be referred into the service. The parents will receive a phone call within about 14 days with an appointment to come into the service, have an assessment with a speech and language therapist. And how that can look is it's needs led. It's very much what the speech and language therapist assesses on the appointments that they come into. They could be offered a one-to-one intervention. They can be offered a group intervention, but also alongside that, you've got a lot of digital resource as well, that the Better Communications, who oversee the balance system, they have a website that we can go in and tap into lots of different resources that support families when they're trying to help their child at home. So the speech and language therapist would do the assessment, make a plan, and then we can help implement that at home and in the environment that the child's involved with, whether that's nursery or whether that's school. Specialist referrals as well. Schools obviously are key to the referrals when they've started at school. We really do need that comprehensive referral that comes in through schools, because with SENCOs and teachers, because they work, they're with the child for an awful long time during the week. So speech and language would work with the SENCO or the teachers who would, if they've raised some concerns, put the referral together. So that would then go, once they're at school, it would go along the neurodevelopmental behavioural pathway. So they would then be seen with either a psychiatrist or a paediatrician, who would then take on that assessment process. Probably widen it out a bit, like we said earlier, where they're so complex, some of the needs that children have, that you couldn't just go on one assessment with a speech and language therapist. It needs to be lots of other people that are involved in that. So school are key to this, making sure that we get really comprehensive referrals that come in. So activity, just to give you an idea of some of the activity that we have, the caseload. So this is a Pan Dorset service. So these numbers are for BCP and Dorset, but the numbers generally are split more or less down the middle. So our caseload tends to sit round about 5,550 children actively open to speech and language at any one time. And of that caseload, there's round about 600 children who would have an EHCP. The inpatient dysphagia service, we would see the child within 48 hours. So once we know there's a problem, we would go into the hospital and meet with the parents and see the child, meet with the clinicians who are working with that child as well to make a plan. Ready Steady Chat, we would offer an appointment within 14 days. We're seeing some really positive feedback coming from Ready Steady Chat. And I think parents are finding that it's really quite helpful to be able to go to the drop-ins. They're called drop-ins, but you still need to have an appointment to come along to it. So it's, but it is something that we've really focused on the 0 to 5s as part of the first phase of the balance system, and we'll start to move it out towards schools in the next few months. And then we work to an 18-week referral to treatment time. There's a number of children that don't get seen within the 18 weeks, but when we look at the reasons why they maybe wouldn't meet the 18 weeks, it tends to be things like, if they've got exams coming up or parents can't get to the appointment, and there's lots of different reasons why that 18-week isn't met. But every single child that is referred to the service is triaged by the service to make sure that they get the service that they need. I just wanted to mention really briefly about the balance system. So this is a system that's been commissioned with the local authorities and with NHS Dorset as well. So this is a whole system framework. So what we recognise is that speech and language therapy, whilst it will give benefit to the child, it's often not the biggest benefit that we could get, because when we collaborate with schools and we work with parents and we make a joint plan, that once we've seen the child in speech and language therapy, we can replicate what's been put into that plan at home and then at school. Once you start to get that collaboration, that's when you see the best outcomes for that child, because you've got that consistency that runs through the system. There's 5 different strands to the balance system, and we're right at the beginning of implementing this. It's going to take a few years to implement it fully. So we're running business as usual alongside an implementation plan. So there's a really extensive plan behind this around going out to schools, talking to schools, because the wider workforce that we really need to work with will be Senkos, teachers, early years provision. So we need to be able to go out and do the training behind that from speech and language therapists. So there's 5 strands. So basically you've got the identification of a problem. You then have to work with families and the workforce, and then you have to look at the environment as well, because you need to make environments that are really conducive to a child learning. So you can't just ignore what's going on around the child in the setting that they're in. So it's about how do we work with that environment, work with the people that are actively involved with the child's care. And then also it's the implementation afterwards. So how do we implement that plan together? So this is just going to take a bit of time for us to move through the implementation of this, but we're seeing some really positive results. Scotland have introduced it across the board. There's an awful lot of other local authorities are now at the process of implementing the balance system, and this isn't devolving any kind of responsibility from speech and language. This is a collaborative approach across anybody that works with children and young people. So the challenges that we have for the service at the moment are that we've got a recruitment issue. There's about a 25% gap in qualified speech and language therapists nationally. So we're really struggling to get young people, anybody to want to come and do it. It's a 4-year degree course that speech and language therapists have to do. We do go to university, open evenings. We've looked at all sorts of different things to try and encourage people to come to Dorset, but the backdrop to this is that this is a national problem. So we've been forced to look at things like apprenticeships, which we're in the process of looking at this time. We have had quite a lot of people that have been interested in applying, and I think we've actually offered posts to the first apprenticeships that will happen through Dorset Healthcare, and they'll work with Bournemouth University to get the support around that. Again, challenges with the balance system is just around how do we implement that while we still continue with business as usual, because we've had to put some resource towards the balance system, obviously around things like training leads. We need people to be able to go out and train the workforce, and we have to have within the action plans, we've got times of review, we've got to look back and have we done the right thing, how's it worked, evaluation all takes time. So we've had to put some resource to that. So managing the business as usual at the same time can present some challenges. And also specialist and alternative placements, which obviously we're not commissioned to provide a service for, but because of this recruitment issue around speech and language therapists, they're asking for some support from our service. And at this stage, we haven't got the capacity to be able to offer that service at this stage. So it's just around, the squeeze on the capacity and the resource that we have at the moment, mostly around recruitment. So I'll just put on the last one, just some new ways of working. Just about some of the workshops that we've implemented, been positively received. Speech and language therapist led Simply Sounds group. So there's lots of work that's going on out in the community around encouraging people to access the service and to come into the service. Ready Steady Chat, that's now started to become embedded across the county, which has taken quite some time to do, but we're getting there now with it. And then the outcomes, the rollout of the communication friendly environment audit tool trial. So there's a trial for this at the moment that's ongoing. We've not got to the end of the trial yet, just to see, because then we have to go back and evaluate whether or not we want to roll this out. But from what I've heard from Erica and Chris, who manage the service, is that they're really keen to roll this communication friendly environment tool out to early years and to schools, about how do you encourage a really sort of healthy environment for children to thrive and learn, and to develop their speech and communication issues. So there's quite a few things that are going on at the moment, and I just put some of the feedback that we've had recently from some of the people who've used the service. So it was just to say that an awful lot of it, once you're in the speech and language therapy with mainstream school children, generally we do tend to see a good improvement. We measure outcomes through the therapy outcome measures, and we do tend to see across all the domains quite an improvement once children have come through speech and language. That was the end of my presentation. It was just to give you a whistle-stop tour of what we provide in speech and language. So I'm open to any questions.
Thank you. Just before I do, Councillor Cooper, I thought because obviously we haven't got the presentation on screen, some of the feedback that has come back is that my child has made progress with their speech and understanding. My child has been able to communicate more with me. My child's attention and listening has improved, and my child has been able to be more involved in activities.
Thank you.
Councillor Cooper, thank you.
Thanks for that. There's a report that's just come out from government about young people are not reading books, but more importantly, their parents are not reading them stories and then getting the children to repeat those stories. And I just wonder if there's a correlation there between the rise in cases and also maybe how you could partner up with libraries whose future may be a little bit delicate, where maybe people could begin to read books and discover books and read books with each other and with children, and then put someone in the mix to kind of make that happen. I mean, what do you think about that?
Oh no, I'd be all for it. I think, you know, when you do work with families and the environment, which are generally schools, it's all those kind of things that we can be putting into plans and encouraging, you know, that active and open communication between families and children. So yeah, I would fully support that. We do work very closely with libraries as well.
Oh, good. And in terms of parents, because parents are not reading to their children, how do you think in your work you could encourage more community-based work to get parents to put down the tablets and pick up a book, a children's book, and read it? Graphic novels.
Yeah, and I think that's a community response, isn't it, rather than just a speech and language response to that. But I think, you know, stressing the importance of reading, you know, and that would be what we'd say in schools as well about the importance of reading. So, but you're going to have some families that, you know, that is going to be a struggle. But it's about that conversation, that open discussion with families about the importance of it.
Councillor Moriarty and then Councillor Hartman.
Thank you. Do you mind if I ask you, are you meeting the 18-week referral to treatment time?
For the majority, yeah, but it's about 90% that we're meeting that target. And the target itself of 18 weeks actually isn't a contractual measurement. It's something that we put in place for us to be able to internally monitor where it is that we're at with the service. So it's not something that is a national measurement, but we felt we needed something to be able to monitor that against. So
I ask that just because a lot of parents are saying that it's really quite challenging to access SALT, and just wondered, you know, what is the kind of barrier really to parents and children being able to access it a little bit earlier? And
yeah, no, I think, you know, for the under fives, I think with Ready Steady Chat having the 14-day, that should help improve the situation at that point. As far as barriers are concerned, you know, for school age children, it could be around the referral process itself. You know, understanding what needs to go into the referral.
Oh, okay. So, sorry to clarify, if the referral isn't completed incorrectly, it can cause delays.
Well, it's not necessarily that. It's about what can the service actually offer the child at that point. So it's about making that assessment of what's come in. Is it something that speech and language in isolation can provide? And it might be something that actually when the speech and language therapy receive it, they go, this isn't just something that speech and language is going to be able to solve. They're going to have to go to something a bit more complex than that.
And then that is the
So what happens in that process is that speech and language would speak with the SENCO, and the SENCO would put the referral if they're at school, and then it goes into a different process.
And that takes longer than 18 weeks.
I don't know about how long that waiting list takes, but I know that from our service, it's about how do we support the SENCOs writing the referrals to go into a slightly different process.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I will have my back to you. So I'm talking. Can't work out with the microphone. Yeah. I just wanted to understand a bit more about the balance system. You said it's new, been trialled in other local authorities in Scotland, I think you mentioned. I just want to understand a bit more about what we had before, why we've moved to the new system, so a bit of context, and also how do we know it's successful and working well in those other local authorities? Yeah. Don't mind just giving
that's fine.
that out a bit. Thank you.
I think what we recognise with speech and language therapy, if you just take it in isolation, you have children with complex communication needs, and you need to have that consistency. And what we were finding was children would come in, they'd maybe have, you know, 6 or 8 weeks worth of speech and language therapy as such, where they sit with the child. What we have to do is then provide that consistency outside of the therapy session. So it's about working with schools and early years and families to understand what that need looks like, to be able to carry that work through in all the settings that children would actually be in. So within schools, it's really important that we can encourage teachers and Senkos to be able to, work with the child in the best way that the speech and language therapist has identified through the balance system.
Sorry, just another, if I may. How long have this system been being used by Dorset, and sort of how do we measure the success? How do we know that it is working?
Yeah, so at this stage, it's been the plan started probably about 18 months ago. It's taken a long time to put the planning in place. So we haven't been doing anything, but we've been doing a lot of planning behind it, but not the doing of it. We've done the first phase at the moment around Ready, Steady, Chat. We have to evaluate that. Behind the governance behind all of this is that Better Communications is the company who implemented the balance system. This is they were speech and language therapists that devised the system. So the governance behind that is we've got a transformation program board, we have steering groups, we have times where we evaluate the progress of where we're at, the priorities, what's the next steps of the program. So it generally takes about 3 years to implement. So we're right at the beginning of starting to implement that. We have a plan. We have worked with some of the early year settings, and we thought starting for the under fives to begin with and working our way up through different age groups is the way for us to start to implement it from sort of 0 to 5 first of all, and then what we have to do is put that plan in place around training with the wider workforce to come on board for the implementation for older children around the balance.
Someone's got a question. I just want to come in with something there. So I think firstly, just trying to understand the start of the journey, particularly if we look at non-neurotypical children. So the complex ones are verbal dyspraxics, or oral dyspraxics, are DLD children. Those are the ones that are really going to require some intensive therapy, and it will go on for years. And it needs to be embedded within the school system, delivered by a trained speech therapist as well. I think that's really key. It's not just about the environment, because it's disordered, isn't it?
Yeah.
So my first point is with the contact with the SALT, in guidance with the Children's Families Act, are they able to make a diagnosis?
There's certain things that speech and language therapists can diagnose, but they're very specific to speech. Anything more complex, they have to then go into the paediatric process, which is provided through University Hospitals Dorset. So not a service that we would provide, but we actively work with that process around the assessment.
Thank you. So I suppose if you go to that multidisciplinary assessment and you're looking at DLD and not autism or
so that
something else,
very much with
the paediatrics. Brilliant, thank you. Once that diagnosis has been made, and obviously generally because of their level of need, they would meet the threshold for an EHCP, and certain schools would need that support as well. Can the speech therapist make recommendations in terms of how much speech therapy they can or should provide and required? Can it be quantified? Can it be specified? And also, can they put in there who it should be delivered by?
The recommendations that they can make are what's the best environment for the child? How many, they call it dosage, how many sessions would you have with that speech and language therapist? As far as where that's delivered, that's not a responsibility of the speech and language therapist, because that's part of the multidisciplinary process. So we would recommend what we think the child needs, and then paediatrician or the psychiatrist put everything together from probably OT and Portage and the school, put that all together, and they can make a recommendation as to what they feel that the child needs. But speech and language don't make recommendations about where that's delivered.
Okay, because obviously private speech therapists can, and they do. I just wondered why therefore the NHS ones couldn't. That's fine. So obviously part of looking at what the local authority are providing, and the big the dichotomy that the local authority are looking at is specialist placements versus delivery through mainstream. And so therefore, if the speech therapists are looking at it in terms of dosages, if they're looking at it in terms of, well, I'm not entirely sure where we can deliver that speech therapy, it really doesn't leave the local authority with much choice, but then to be looking at specialist provisions where it's embedded, where there's trained teachers, where they can understand that complexity, where the speech and language therapist can sit within the classroom as well. And I'm just thinking, I was looking at some reports that people sent to me. A DLD child can require up to 3 sessions a week, one for speech, one for the language, shape coding, etc., and the other one group therapy. So I'm just trying to think how health are working therefore with the local authority so they can meet their measures and have more children in mainstream whilst also being supported by health to help deliver that.
I think it's fair to say, oh sorry, I can't see you. I think it's fair to say that we're always interested in having the conversation with the local authority about how we deliver. I think it's fair to say that, and I think you alluded to this in your just before your question, is that from a Dorset healthcare perspective, we don't provide all speech and language in all provisions. You talked about independent speech and language therapists who don't work in the same way that we would work in our service. So there is a difference in provision and how those therapists work. So we can't comment on what an independent provider would deliver, but in terms of the service that we provide in our service, in our trust, those are the things that we've presented today. So it's really important that people understand that not all speech and language in the system and in a lot of the alternative provisions are provided by our service. There are other provisions around that. In terms of working with the local authority, absolutely we would work closely as closely as we can.
Okay, I'm just not entirely sure why they can't work in the same way that an independent can, because quite simply the legislation is the same, the advice from the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists is the same.
Code of conduct. So the code of conduct, all speech and language therapists would work to the same code of conduct. In terms of diagnosis, we would work with the best. I think that the other thing to bear in mind, and I think Jill alluded to it, was around the assessment is a multi-agency assessment, so it would be working with in the best interest of that young person within a system, working with other professionals. I'm not sure, and in terms of independent providers, how closely linked into the system they would be, and therefore that might be why they're more likely to do diagnosis, whereas in a multi-agency service you might well find that professionals want to work collaboratively, and paediatricians or psychiatrists might want to take the lead in diagnosis, and it might be more complicated.
Yeah, I had moved away from diagnosis and talk about recommendations for your HCP annual reviews, etc. And generally, when they're that complex, dosage doesn't work. It's that continued and consistency that I was trying to understand what it is that's delivered. My very last question on this before I bring in other people was David Webb, who is our youth offending service officer. We spoke to him about speech therapy, and he was really quite clear that there is that correlation. The Burko report brings in that correlation between youth offending and speech therapy. We know that there's undiagnosed SLNCN in prisons, for example, etc. What they were finding was there was undiagnosed speech and language needs there, but they couldn't get the therapy. And I know there's a problem trying to get therapies into schools and delivered in a consistent and continued manner, so it's really effective and it makes some real changes as positive outcomes. But we're really letting also down our most vulnerable young people. One of the things I've always said is before they become offenders, they're victims, and we've let them down if they've got into that youth offending service. So what are you doing in terms of the delivery that youth offending service and the programs that they've got in place, please?
So we do have speech and language therapy as part of the Youth Justice Service. So there's already a provision in there. We've agreed this week that we will increase that provision. So that will be going in the next. We're recruiting to that at the moment. So there is already a provision. And you're absolutely right in terms of we're seeing the impact of COVID, the demand on speech and language services, the impact of that developmental issues that came up for children and young people in COVID is absolutely being seen in their ability to communicate. So absolutely, we see it in the Youth Justice Service, and there is a speech and language provision that is already being provided, and we're just putting in some more provision to it too.
Thank you, Councillor Harman. I think you wanted to come back on some stuff.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to mention COVID actually and what that looks like, because anecdotally we know that a huge impact on speech and language and communication for our children and young people. And I was going to link it into the recruitment side and just wonder if, you said we're struggling to recruit at the moment. Is that because demand is currently outstripping need, because the demand is so high? And I was wondering what is being done within Dorset to try and recruit more. I think internships are mentioned, but also nationally, sort of government strategies, or how are other local authorities recruiting? How are they dealing with this issue as well? Thank you.
And I think it's the appeal of becoming a speech and language therapist that people aren't wanting to go and do the degree for it. It's a long degree, 4 years. We are having to look at different ways of delivering that service if we can't encourage enough people to come into it. As far as a government strategy around it, I don't know that I've heard anything about that. But demand as well. Demand has gone up, especially for the under fives. And I think with Ready Steady Chat being able to come in and access the service in a timely manner is going to really support with that. I think probably schools are starting to see some of the young children coming in with speech and language difficulties at greater demand and a greater rate at this stage. So I don't think we could deny that it's had an impact on the service that we deliver, but it's it's recognised. We knew that this would happen. We sort of suspected during COVID we were seeing an awful lot of children that were isolated at home and they weren't getting as much interaction with other children. So we did know that this would be coming as a problem. So that's why we thought with the balance system we'd start with the 0 to 5s, because we knew that was a growing need at that point.
Is the speech and language therapy degree funded at all, or is that entirely you take on the debt yourselves when you go to university and study to be a speech and language therapist?
I don't honestly know, actually.
I assume that it is just like a
normal one. Yeah,
I don't think they do recruit at the moment. Sorry, they don't do recruit to train speech and language. So there isn't a national program. I think it is just like a lot of professionals, health and social care professionals. It is a case of funding themselves. But it's a good question.
Yeah, really good. But also I think they're around the apprenticeships. That's why it might appeal to other people who've got families, who are really keen to do this work, but need to earn some money at the same time. So I think it's one way of us being able to recruit some people that would be really good at doing this.
Yeah, I think one follow-up question to that, which was if you are 25% understaffed currently, does that mean that sitting somewhere is budget for hiring those 25%, that extra 25%, and could that potentially be rejigged to funding some kind of bursary scheme at a local university?
I think we're in conversations at the moment with the universities to say what could they offer, because obviously we need to put a package together to support students coming through. As far as we haven't got a 25% vacancy nationally, there's a 25% vacancy, so we have got some vacancy. And this is what we're having to look at different ways and different groups that we might implement, different skill mix within the team. But the vacancy certainly within our team is not 25%. Yeah.
So one of the feedback kind of concerns I've had about the balance system is it's not needs led, it's resource led. So there's not enough to go around, so therefore we'll divvy it up in a pot. And therefore, those with the very complex needs, that continued investment in speech and language, get a dosage, as you refer to it, rather than what they actually need. Now, I don't know. I've not experienced the balance system, but is that how it works? So we need to divvy up the pot that we have, and we'll try and spread it around as many as we can, rather than look at need.
Reassurance, it's not resource led at all. It's very much needs led by. It's started by the speech and language therapists around the recommendations. What is it the child needs? But we know from experience and the evidence base that's come with the balance system that we need that wider engagement with people that are with the children, to make sure that they get that consistent approach. So it's not resource led at all, it's needs led. And I think children who've got complex needs, as we say, speech and language endorsed healthcare are not commissioned to provide a service for complex needs, because that sits under a different commissioning arrangement through the University Hospital Dorset. So we can do the bit to support the referral that would go into that. If they're highly complex children, they would likely sit under the paediatric service if it's a complex need that they have.
Okay, so your DLDs and your verbal dyspraxics would sit elsewhere.
It would depend on what complexities that the child has. So we would certainly support the referral and the assessment process, but it might be that it needs further assessment by a paediatrician.
Entirely sure I understand that. Just moving on, and then I think Councillor Moranti has a question. Once they've had their dosage, obviously it's 17 weeks from referral to receiving it, and they have their dosage, how long is it then they have to go back to the back of the queue and then wait again, do they? And then how long is that to get their next block of sessions?
They wouldn't go to the back of the queue. I think, once if it's needs led, and this is the beauty of the balance system, you can be in the universal bit for a while and go into targeted or specialist, and you move between the different bits, so you don't ever get knocked back out of the system. You have almost like a caseload that's sort of non-active. So if children are coping and they're doing well and everything's going as you'd expect, they can still sit on your caseload, but it's in a slightly different way. It's not an active caseload, so you shouldn't be knocked off the system. And also, even now, if a child's having speech and language therapy, they shouldn't be knocked off and go right back to the beginning of the waiting list, because you'd highlight that this child had therapy before. You'd speak to the speech and language therapist to see if there's something else that needs to happen, because there's different levels within the service that we provide, enhanced or, universal offer or universal plus.
But this is honestly my last question, but it's because, and I'm really sorry, Councillor Moranti, and it's really simple. So if parents are experiencing this differently to what you're saying, and because I've had lots of feedback about this balance system, and they're experiencing something very different to what we're hearing today.
Mm-hmm.
Who do they contact and say, actually, this isn't what we heard at Children's Services, and we don't think that the balance system is quite right, or it's not being implemented quite right for us and our child?
Come through service managers, ourselves, Helen, myself. We'd welcome any feedback. The only thing I would say about the balance system is that we haven't fully implemented it. It takes time for us to do that, and we're still right at the beginning of this process. So I think experience around the balance system at this stage, we need to sort of test this out and implement other phases of this before we really get a good idea of where we're at.
And we'd be happy to come and talk about the balance system separately to this, because it is quite it's a different way of working. So I think I'm sure one of the commissioners of the service, that's one of the local authority commissioners, wanted to spend some time thinking about the balance system. So we'd be more than happy to come back and talk about that.
Thank you, Chairperson. You've answered my question. You've asked my question.
Anyone else at this point? No. Thank you very much. If you don't mind, could I just ask for those details to be sort of sent over to the Democrats, and we'll add it in the minutes, because I think absolutely there are obviously some people having different experiences. That'd be really useful.
It'd be really helpful for us to understand some of the issues as well. So that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. So next on the agenda item is school permanency and exclusions and suspensions. And we've got Kelly Twitchen having presented this. Hello.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Sorry I can't join you this evening. My name's Kelly Twitchen. I'm the head of the virtual school and the inclusion service. And as the Chair has stated, I'm presenting the permanent exclusion and suspension reports, which you've all received. So the report outlines the importance of full-time education, which we know is crucial in allowing our children to go on to fulfil a positive and successful life. It also reduces the likelihood of our young people becoming NEET, not in education, employment and training, or involved in criminal activity. The council do have concerns regarding the number of children that are permanently excluded and suspended in BCP. However, our developing education improvement programme, our strategies and the recent national documentation that's been released we'll begin to look at working with schools and partners to ensure that there's a system within BCP that allows our children to access a full-time education and in respect to permanent exclusions and suspensions, reducing these and ensuring children have the right education placement that meet their needs. We have had initial conversations with stakeholders and partners who have expressed some of the reasons that they feel for the increase in permanent exclusions and suspensions that we've seen, especially since the pandemic. And some of those reasons that have been stated to us are around finance and staffing pressures within schools, a reduced flexibility in the curriculum that our schools are able to offer, and the need for more high quality alternative provision and outreach. So if we look at the data, which there is numerous amounts in the report, but if we just look at the validated data from the academic year 2021 to 22, and the reason that we're looking at that year is that there is no validated data any more recent than that. As I've said, we've seen an increase nationally and regionally since the pandemic. But if we look at our primary schools, we can see that they are following a regional and national trend for permanent exclusions, and they are lower than the national rates, which is really positive. In terms of suspensions, again, following a regional and national trend, but are higher than the national rate. Our secondary schools are again following trends for permanent exclusions, but this is where we are really seeing a high rate, and in some cases nearly double the national. For suspensions in our secondary schools, they are again following the trends around national and regional, and are lower than our national figures. So we know that there are an increase in this area, and we know that there's work to be done. So moving forward, we'd like to continue with the Education Entitlement Board, which is a board, a partnership board within the local authority, where partners meet with schools to discuss young people who are missing out on education and are at risk potentially of permanent exclusion or suspension. The board work together with the school to offer advice, and in some cases are able to offer alternative provision to support that young person and to allow them to remain within the school. Recently, the Inclusion Quality Mark framework has been released, which had good attendance from our schools. This is a national framework for schools to use to support their inclusion journey, and it gives them the opportunity to look at ways that they can make changes within their schools to ensure that they're as inclusive as possible. Data is really important, and we have a dashboard of data for the inclusion service within BCP. This looks at data where children are not accessing a full-time education. We continue to work with our data teams on this dashboard, and it gives the council the opportunity to track those children that are not receiving that education, to work with schools and other partners to ensure that we can get them back in as quickly as possible. You'll all be aware of the remodelling of the early help system. We know that this will support our children and families to get the right support at the right time. And we know that schools are really encouraging that holistic support around a system that works with the child and the family to make sure that they're able to access school. So we continue to undertake an inclusion review, and a strategy is currently being written. This is being written alongside our commissioning colleagues, and it will include input from our partners across the system. The strategy will look to explore and understand the reasons for permanent exclusions and suspensions and the increasing rates. We will work with schools to look at options that will allow children to remain in school where appropriate, and we'll look closely at the provision that's currently available and what needs to be developed. Our working groups will be extended to include our partners, allowing the local area to make changes that will improve our system and reduce our permanent exclusions and suspensions within BCP. Are there any questions?
So we're going to invite Mr. Evans to kick off, please.
Hi Kelly, nice to see you. Just speaking as a head teacher, we hate, I'm a primary head teacher, we hate making suspensions and exclusions. The reason we do so, I've outlined earlier, we think they're necessary to break a pattern of negative behaviour. They're necessary to retain our staff. Our staff are sometimes injured by pupils, spat on, etc. And also to attempt to give that child the opportunity to reflect on their behaviour and bring it some improvement. I hear what you mentioned in terms of BCP's responses, but my experience as head teacher and the experience of colleagues is there is one of confusion and frustration, and often the way that I get ahead with this is by complaining to the very top. If I have put forward requests for help to avoid somebody entering a position of permanent exclusion, sending emails, calling, those things are because of busyness unanswered, and I throw up my hands knowing what to do sometimes. I think another approach which would really help us as head teachers is significant training from those people in the know. We are, as a school, employing some training this summer from Nigel Bowes to look at our own school culture and how we could change that. But I think across the sector, it'd be really useful for more head teachers and teachers to be involved in that training so that we can get an idea about how we can bring this figure down, because it is concerning for us. But at the moment, the pathway to prevent that, I don't feel is clear.
No, and I think you're right, and I think that's where the work is being looked at. The strategy that's being written is in line with the national document that's been recently released around alternative provision and that improvement. And we do need a pathway. We need a clear pathway that all partners are aware of. I think you're absolutely right. In the national document, it talks about looking at ways that we can provide that training and who's best to do that, and working with providers, as you say, that are experts in that field, in working with young people who are often really struggling potentially with anxiety, mental health, social emotional needs for other reasons. So we absolutely do need that pathway to be really clear. And I think working with partners and yourselves as schools to make sure that we get that pathway right is really important, and that's certainly part of our strategy and our improvement plan.
Thanks, Kelly. One simple suggestion, thinking back 10 years ago in a London borough, when we were at this point, a service existed where somebody would come to us, look at our behaviour plan, look at our provision and make immediate suggestions. And knowing that there was a number or an email that you could ring was so helpful at the time. And in this authority, that just doesn't exist for me. And I feel really upset that we are sometimes suspending when perhaps we don't need to, or we could get help earlier. I think it needs urgent fixing for us as primary head teachers.
No, I think you're right. I think there is more that we can do. There are ways, and there are, I think, that the ways who to contact, I think, needs to be more clearly shared, and for schools to be more aware of this. I take your point, and absolutely we'll take that back.
Thank you so much, Councillor Harmer.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Kelly, for that. There's quite a few new councillors on this committee, so I was just wondering, obviously looking at the tables and the figures, it shows of the exclusions and suspensions, our area has been consistently higher than both South West region and national averages since at least 2017 that the figures are showing us. So I just want to get a bit more understanding and a picture of what the story has been up until now, why this has been ongoing and increasing. Also, what has been previously in place to try and help reduce the levels of exclusions and suspensions in school? Have BCP worked alongside other local authorities to share good practice and strategies that have helped? I was reading Southwark Council's, they've got a zero exclusions policy, which made for very interesting reading. So I'm just wondering sort of what other work's been done with other partners to help us and hopefully get a better understanding of why we are where we are.
Thank you. So we're part of a network. We do work with other local authorities, and we certainly do look at other options and other methods that other local authorities use. There'll be lots of opinions, certainly from head teachers, around a zero permanent exclusion policy, and there are fors and against that. But quite often head teachers find that that's not always a successful model to use. In terms of prior to BCP, I can't. Unfortunately, I can't answer that. If I'm being honest, not being part of only recently becoming part of the inclusion service. In terms of BCP, we can see that it has increased, which I think's why we need to look at the trend. So nationally, the trend has increased. So we know that it's across the board, things are increasing. That's not a reason not to move forward and to improve and to get better and find out why. But I think what we need to do is to really dive into and work with our partners, and especially our schools and our head teachers, as to why this is happening. Anthony mentions that not knowing where to go beforehand, and I think that's really important. We really need to look at where we can go, where can our head teachers and our schools go? Is that support there for them? Is it readily available? And how can they access it? So I think there's still lots to unpick and lots to understand. And I certainly think that we are on the beginning of a journey in this instance. I don't think we have all the answers just yet. What I do know is that there is a real appetite from our schools and from our head teachers to work with us to find out the answers to why things are happening and what ways that we can work differently to try and improve this situation for our young people. So I don't think I've answered the question fully, but that's certainly the journey that we're headed on.
Yes, Moriarty.
Thank you for that, Kelly. I'm just thinking about cost, really. In number 16, it says the cost of unregistered provision is significantly higher than registered. You're looking over double. So is there a reason that we've got no or less registered provision? Because obviously that would save money. And the kind of supplementary question is, the cost of excluding or looking after a child who's been excluded costs a certain amount of money. Has anybody, I'm sure you have, thought about actually putting that money into the system long before they're excluded, so that it saves money, it saves trauma, it saves emotional toil on teachers, that kind of thing? I'm sure research has been done that early intervention would actually stop a lot of suspensions and expulsions. I don't know if that's something that we can look at.
Absolutely, and we have tried. We are working with the school at the moment around putting in that money, as you say, beforehand, much earlier, rather than doing it at the end, as you say, whilst that young person's gone through that trauma and that relationship has broken down. I think there are lots of different ways and there are a lot of different options. I think we've also got to remember that there are different options that will work for different young people. So what works for one young person won't work for another. So I think it's about really having a good offer that will allow us to reach as many young people as possible. In terms of increasing the number of registered alternative places, we are looking into that. We are looking at ways to do that. I think we need to be mindful that the more places that we have, are we then just going to fill them? So I think there's that's my worry about just automatically going for, okay, we'll if we need X number of more places, we'll just provide X more places. Obviously, and that also comes at a cost as well. So I think it's about understanding why. For me, it's that why question is really important. I think that there is a need to increase the number of registered places. I don't disagree with that. That then we do have to find the money for that, because we can't ask a provision to set up X number of spaces without providing some funding. Otherwise, the school or the provider won't be able to function. It's not something that you can do last minute. Obviously, you need to be prepared. You need to have teachers and classrooms ready for those young people to come in. So there's a lot to look into, but all very good points. And yes, absolutely, I think there is something to be looked at in terms of front loading that funding and working with schools before we get to that point. And I think that's what Anthony mentioned around knowing who to speak to, and at that point being able to access some money. Hopefully that then would be much less than the money we'd need to offer a full-time place if the young person was permanently excluded.
Thank you, Kat.
I've got Councillor Cooper next, but I'm just aware of time and the young people have a question. Do you mind if I just bump them up the queue? Thank you.
Hi, sorry. I'm really interested in this. Like, it's a very large reason as to why I got into youth parliament. And I'm just looking at the chart, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, but what hasn't been addressed is the term persistent disruptive a holistic term that includes things like racism, bullying and verbal abuse? Or is that a completely separate thing, as in they're literally just being disruptive within the classroom, suggesting they have some kind of mental disability? And also, what does the E, the K and the N mean in the SEN status? I couldn't find a key.
Okay, so E is for education, health and care plan. K is for SEND support, and N is for not applicable. So they don't have a special educational need. Sorry, I should have put that on there. Going back to persistent disruptive behaviour, there is a criteria. So when a school suspends or permanently excludes a young person, there has to be a reason has to be given in terms of why that's happened. And you're looking at the obviously persistent disruptive behaviour is the most common reason for young people to be permanently excluded and suspended. And it overarching, it can include any behaviour that is continuous. The reason for that behaviour isn't indicated. So I think what you asked was, could that be because of a mental health difficulty? Potentially, yes. It's just a continued behaviour that happens repeatedly over and over again.
Thank you so much.
It's all right.
Thanks for waiting, Councillor Cooper.
Young people are a priority, in my view, anyway. Yeah, if I can involve the head teachers and you in this question, I'm thinking back in the there's many different reasons why young people become disruptive and anarchic and are not willing to conform within the quite rigid education system we have. And lots of teachers within that are doing their best to help people shine. And I kind of remember in terms of the they're kind of not nipping things in the bud, because that's like saying young people is a problem when they're not. It's often the adult society they're swimming in that is the problem. Is that there used to be things in schools, and help me out here, like in maybe in primary schools, you had pastoral care workers. We had a system where the youth team here, well, in Poole, we had youth workers in every school, and I'll go back to Carter Community School before it became the Cornerstone Academy. And this is thinking on Anna Maria's point about taking money which is spent on exclusions outside the school. Well, what can we put in schools as resource to begin to work creatively with young people to identify the root cause of their problems, and then find some solutions. So we had in Carter, we had a room with toys and musical instruments, and a pastoral care worker and a youth worker who would kind of meander and walk around, and they began to get relationships with young people. And early on in the days, they might form trust with young people. Not all of them, because some young people bring really, really severe problems that have to be dealt with in a severe way. So what's your view on that? And is it happening? And have you got the money for it?
So there are pastoral workers in most primary schools. I have a pastoral worker. I have what's called an ELSA, who works with emotional literacy around children. Both are absolutely stretched to the max and can't really cope with their current workload. We're fortunate that we have spaces, not necessarily with toys, but with other things in there. I think it's just very, very complex with some children, really, particularly post-COVID, to try and understand why those behaviours are occurring. So I take your point about nipping it in the bud and working with professionals, but even with our pastoral workers, sometimes we still can't understand why children are behaving the way that they are, really. And we really try to unpick the triggers, but it's very, very hard. And when there is a depletion in services and things like referral to paediatricians taking up to 18 months, we're educators. We don't understand sometimes some of the triggers and some of the reasons why these children are presenting as they are. We do our absolute utmost to keep them. Going back to what Councillor Mariarty said, what can happen both in BCP and nationally is if you were to permanently exclude a child, you may well get a phone call the next day to arrange the services for that child. And all those services, such as alternative provision, kick in. Well, why wasn't that earlier? We could have used that money to give some mentoring, to give some respite to everybody, and we could have kept that child. That's the tragedy that is a national issue as well as a BCP issue.
And just to finish off, have you got any more ideas like that to put into the frame? Because obviously, head teachers and teachers are the best people to tell us what needs to be done within the schools to support young people.
I need
4 years. Well, maybe that's a piece of work that could be done.
I was going to say, I've got a recommendation written out. I think that if someone wants to ask some more questions, or I can propose a recommendation and then perhaps questions after continues, up to you. Councillor Moriarty.
You have a question about number 21. So I don't know if I want to be sure. Okay. It's about ethnicities of children who've been suspended. And I appreciate what it's saying is that overall there's no gap, there's no inequality. However, if you dig into it, there's clearly a significant kind of proportionally a lot more white and black Caribbean kids and white Gypsy and Roma kids are disproportionately suspended. And I'm just wondering, that is very, very big. What are we doing about that? Because we can't just say that people who are kind of BAME, which is that horrible phrase, are all the same, because everybody's, we're all diverse. But actually digging into the data of minority groups, it looks like there are some areas where it's really very worrying, really. Thank you.
And I think that that's where we need to look in terms of our strategy and looking into and as I said earlier, working with our head teachers. The strategy that we will look to produce will be co-produced. We'll work with health, we'll work with our youth justice service, we'll work with our schools to ensure that we've got all of the system working together, and certainly looking at those ethnic groups will be part of that strategy. As you say, as a whole, if you look at all of the groups together, there isn't a disparity, but it does say in the report that then you can, if you do look at individual groups, those two groups are, as you say, are absolutely mentioned. So that's something that we will certainly look into as, in our strategy.
Thank you, that's reassuring.
So Mr. Evans has a final point.
Sorry, one final point in your answer to your question earlier about ideas. What I'd like to do in meeting with a number of head teachers recently for breakfast, we've all said, let us run our own alternative provision on site, gives the trust, gives the money, help us collaborate, and we'd be more than happy to do that rather than pay for something second rate that doesn't really educationally benefit the children. So there's a number of us that are up for that.
So we've absolutely asked schools to engage in an alternative provision working group in order to do that, and have reached a number of proposals, and as we've had a conversation about what that looks like. So Kelly hasn't been around for a while, so those conversations have happened, and we have a number of schools looking to do that in the same way we have in the SEND space. So that's very much our thinking in terms of that kind of, let's work with those that have the children in the settings to keep the children in settings and to secure the workforce and the anxieties and issues that we've talked about. Thank you.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, just jumping off the question regarding ethnicity and exclusions. And this question came from Councillor Olivia Brown, who couldn't be here today, but she did ask me to ask the exact same question that was just asked on this matter. But she did mention that other councils such as Haringey, Harrow and Cambridge have all published similar statistics to this, and was asking if we have done anything or worked with any of those councils on this matter, as they're simultaneously dealing with it, and there's no point in duplicating the work and all doing it if there is a solution out there already.
I think that's really interesting, and that's something that I'll certainly take back and look into. So yeah, thank you very much.
Councillor Macri. Sorry, Councillor Martin, I'm not sure, did you have? Oh, you did. Okay, right, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, the alternative provision strategy that has currently been produced and should hopefully be published in March 2024. Will the committee get sight of it?
Certainly hope so. We can put that in the recommendations, but Ms. Hadley?
Thank you.
Sarah? Thank you. Yeah. Councillor Martin.
I suppose a good thing about going at the end is all your questions get asked and answered. But
so you're saving the best till last.
Well, no pressure. But one of the questions I had for Anthony in our session prior to today, he proactively answered, and I completely agree. The whole sometimes the solution is to exclude a child so they get the support they need. It's just mind blowing. Councillor Cooper's points around the rigid educational system that we are in, which is archaic now for kids in a completely different generation that need a completely different level or diverse approach, a less rigid approach to education. Completely agree with that. The bit for me is this trust element, and it's what's really positive is a couple of things that have been discussed tonight around, you know, Anthony, you've raised around that improved communication, and we've talked about, Kelly, you've acknowledged that we've looked to improve that, and we're talking about that trust element of schools looking after their own provisions, and we've had the response around the pragmatic conversations that are happening around that as well. Is there anything else that we can bring to the forefront to try and rebuild this trust that seems to be lacking between schools and the council? Any other ideas or anything else that we would want to bring out today whilst we've got the opportunity to have yourself in the room and Kelly that might be a good idea just to put on record or bring to the forefront?
All I can say is I think recently, and as a result of one of the benefits of Safety Valve is for a number of us as head teachers, having access to you as counsellors has been marvellous. We've had some meetings prior to this, and I just encourage all of you to go and visit our schools and see. We've talked about some negative things here, but there's a lot to celebrate in our schools, and that's not been mentioned at all. You know, my school in the middle of Bournemouth, we are doing incredible things with some very vulnerable children, and you know, bring some context to these conversations. You know, us sitting in rooms and having committees are wonderful, but just come in and see what we're doing. We've got some councillors coming in and meeting my school parliament next week. That's, I think, ideal to build bridges so that we can understand exactly what's going on and both the areas for development and the celebrations too. Not sure if that's too woolly an argument, but I think that's the best way.
Thank you. I'm going to bring this to a close, if I may. And if anyone does take up Mr. Evans on his offer, you get to meet Studland Dog as well. So it's a 2-for-1, definitely. Yeah, it's worth going along to his school. The recommendation that I was going to suggest, and Mr. Dorian Lewis will kill me for using these words, but it's the co-production side, which I think can be really powerful if used correctly, but perhaps we overuse it too much. But it's ask for yourself, Kelly, to come back in September, having perhaps with head teachers and present jointly with head teachers if they want to, about a pathway and action plan. And the reason is because I sit here with my vice chair and we've been listening to this since 2015, and this is no reflection on you at all, Kelly, not whatsoever. But we keep having the same conversations, and I still don't understand what it is that you're going to do that's different to anything that's been done before. And I think perhaps we change that conversation and ask that we do invite the head teachers to help lead on this, if that's okay. Maybe see if that makes a difference, and just try and shake it up a little bit. But you know, it's got to be better than perhaps repeating what we've done before, if that's okay. So I don't know how you feel about that, Kelly. I think September's probably the right time, the start of the new year. And then panel, if you're happy with that, if you're happy to adopt that recommendation. I've got Kelly wanting, sorry. Oh,
Yeah.
no, sorry,
So the motivation is absolutely there, and the willingness. There is an absolute need for the system to gain some maturity in terms of how we work together. There is some initial workshops, etc., that are already going on against some of the education improvement work that we're doing across the system. So we can absolutely bring something back in September. When we talk about teachers and representations of heads, we're talking about a huge number of representations. So I just want to be cognitive that there are a number of heads in the system that may also want to furnish a view and also want to participate, which we absolutely will. So yes, but can we just kind of formulate what that might look like, and whether heads want to come and do that, etc., etc. I think it would be the question mark, because yeah, it's whether they would wish to do that or not, or who would want to be represented, because there is a number of them, and some of them are academies, etc., etc. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And having gone out, and thank you very much to everyone who's invited me to their schools over the last few weeks. But I think there is an absolute desire to want to make this work, particularly from the heads, from primary to right the way up to secondary. So I think my recommendation, I take on board everything you said, but I still, you know, we can use that word. I think heads and schools and education, including alternative provisions, etc., need to be part of that pathway and part of that discussion this time, if that's okay. So did you want to?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say there's an element of not wanting to limit ONS's overview of some of the work that will be done across that education system. And so there is an education improvement board. And so there may be a number of elements that we want to bring to show you, rather than just one specific issue, but we can work and have that conversation with you. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be really good. And I think we've got a forward work plan meeting this week, so that'd be really helpful. Thank you so much. Brilliant. So on that note, I have no proper wording. I have a few key words, so I don't know if somehow Sinead can help fill in spots, but to recommend that we ask BCP Council to co-produce, along with heads and representatives from education facilities, pathways and the action plans, and to bring that back to committee in the September. I don't know how you can make that or I think Brian might be my seconder then, if that's all right. Brilliant, thank you. Is everyone in agreement?
I'm not too sure what we're on about really, because based on what Kathy was saying, sorry to call you Kathy, oh, that's all right. You know, we're at a starting point, loads of different services and loads of different partners. I mean, right across the conurbation, that's a kind of a massive job to do by September. So you know, whether it could be, you know, I don't know, locality organised in terms of the three different, you know, conurbations. You know, you've got Christchurch, you've got Bournemouth and Poole. I mean, that's a hell of a lot. I think it needs some more thinking through before we have a recommendation to put that pressure on teachers and schools to kind of all work together when they're working. I mean, what does the head teacher think? I mean, is it? I mean, you're at the coalface with this kind of thing. Sorry to put you on the spot.
I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer, really. I think it might be Kathy and Sharon, but I think, yes, there are a huge number of primary schools across the conurbation, but, and this might sound dreadfully simplistic, but a number of head teachers coming together, sharing expertise, looking at the data and trying to understand that as a research project. I think there's huge value in that. I wouldn't write it off. I think we can do a lot together with expertise.
Yeah, yeah, it's just the logistics of that. So
I think so. In December, I met with head teachers and said we need to look at a number of things, and one of them was the use of alternative provision, our suspensions, our exclusions, and we had quite a high number of schools and head teachers in the room. We asked and we identified 3 areas as a partnership that we said we would work on, and alternative provision was one of them. And I wrote out to head teachers saying, can you now please nominate people that can join part of this conversation in order to look at alternative provision, to understand the data. We've been working on the data set in the background. Every head teacher that's reached out to me has had a personal response from me. We have a list of head teachers who have said they're interested in joining that working party. Frankly, we've had some other head teachers that said, don't want to join just now. That's also accepted and acknowledged. So, so there is a piece of work already underway through our education improvement plan to get this moving. Whether we can in September be really clear about where we are, the actions, the resolutions, the next steps, etc., is another matter. But there is a work programme already underway that Kelly and others are working on, including that alternative provision strategy, looking at what's happening nationally, best in class nationally, and we're working with our Bedford sector-led improvement partner. Because many of these children, as the report says, are SEND support EHCP children. So I think in a way the recommendation is already underway through local authority action, and it's really important we don't duplicate what we're trying to do. Equally, frankly, just like schools, we have only so much resource in the local authority. And we do have a number of things we need to do. So we've been very considered since I've arrived in terms of what do we need to do and in which order do we need to do it. But in the absolute focus that we will work in partnership with the schools, and that we know that by doing that, we can actually hopefully mobilise the resource and experience as a partnership unit. So I think we've already identified it as an issue. We haven't got a standing start, but it's really important that we recognise I've only got a certain cohort of staff to do a number of really urgent things.
Thank you. I think I'm still going to ask for September. It's 8 months away. Kelly's obviously alluded to the fact that this is work starting. But I'm just aware of the impact that exclusions and suspensions have. They're monumental, not only, in terms of the financial cost of the local authority, which you're working really hard on, but the cost to that individual and to also the cohorts within that school and that staff. So I think I'm still asking for September for an update and see how you get on. And perhaps, it might focus the mind along with everything else that you are having to do. And I appreciate it's a big ask. But that's where I'm going. So, Councillor Harman.
Just a really quick question. That piece of work that's already underway, what is the time frame for that? When with everything all being well, when would we be looking to get the sort of answers that?
So we have, I think the answer to that is we need to get into the workshops and look at what comes out of the workshops to determine actually what are the quick wins. So Anthony and I had a conversation the other day around a particular child that we've looked at that individual child, that learning and the pathway, and what are the things we can do now. And Kelly and the team are working on some of those things. So it isn't that we don't do things throughout the work in progress. Frankly, we need the strategy, but we need the discussion, and then we need to think about, okay, with our resource base, what are we going to do? In which order are we going to do it? As I've said, some head teachers have already written to me, reached out and said, with our falling pupil role, we have space and places and we would like to trial something. Equally, in fairness, want to make sure that everybody gets an option to contribute to that, and that we're fair in who maybe gets that resource provision, and we do that fairly and squarely. Now, it might be that there's a need for 5 and 5 come forward and it's great. It might be there's a need for 5 and 15 come forward. We would then need to have a programme of how we get from 5 to 15. That could result in whether we implement, I'll just make it to go along now, in September or in January. So if you can afford us time to get those workshops, then scope out, actually, here are our quick wins, things we can absolutely talk to you about with some certainty in September. Here are the longer term issues which might result in changing our funding base and going through a commission process and service level agreement and property. All of those things might mean some things might take 12 months or 18 months if we're talking about capital provision for units. Very detailed response, but so I think the absolute answer to your question is after the first 2 workshops, I think we'll be very clear in terms of the scope of the programme of work and the time and when we can deliver and what we can deliver by what date. So, yeah.
I just wanted to see maybe we should change the recommendation in that sense, because I don't know if we're duplicating what they've already done. So the recommendation might be to find out what they're doing rather than creating a new group.
So I think I'm still going to ask for that work to be done with the head teachers, I think, and I know, absolutely, and just to pop that within that recommendation. Yes. Yeah. So I'm still going to pop that and just make sure that it is that co-production that's going, and it's really good to hear that's already ongoing. So I think what we could perhaps do then is, would it be or would you prefer, therefore, that it comes back for an update with progress reports, much as the strategy and action plans that you may have in place, and then come back but present that perhaps with the representation of head teachers or education professionals? Would that be something that you think would be more manageable? I'm just aware of the impact that this has on everybody, and it just feels like it's along with everything else, but it just really does feel quite important. It's not one of the things that we drop a ball on or something.
We would absolutely agree, and so that's why it's got our attention, that we absolutely do feel this is something we absolutely need to address, and we need to work with schools in terms of how we support the system to manage the issues and how we build capacity. And as Sharon said, there are some things which are quicker wins, other things. So if we were going to recommission, then that will take us a good year to recommission. But what we might be able to do is work with schools to identify what it is that we need to commission, identify those children and young people, or what that provision would look like. So we can absolutely come back and give an update of where we're at, what we've got in terms of that action plan. What are the quick wins, as Sharon says, and what are the things that will take us a longer term? But it's absolutely on our agenda.
Thank you. So just going, but can I also then include, though, that the devising that pathway, because that seems to be where that gap is at the moment, and it seems to be the thing that people seem to want. So I think you've got the wording for the recommendation.
Thank you. Sorry, I think so. I'm clear that you're asking for an update, and you're asking for that in September, on where the work streams are at, have been referenced by the officers. In terms of your reference to co-production, I think we need a new clear form of wording. It may be that what you're now saying is that you are supporting the importance of that or something like that, because you're hearing from the officers that that's happening. But I think we need a clear form of wording in order for the committee to know what they are agreeing with in terms of co-production, because I'm not clear now what that is, I'm afraid.
That's fine.
suppose you could, you could, Chair, as we've done with previous, because the way I understand it, what I think it's incumbent upon this committee to do is to put down in writing somewhere what our concerns are, so that we've expressed that, recognise the work that's underway, but then have it written down that we would like an update along the lines of the things that we've expressed concern about. So you could have a recommendation that this committee, for instance, notes the work that has been done in this arena, is encouraged to hear that there's work underway for co-production between the council and head teachers, and requests for an update on that piece of work to come before the committee around September.
Would it be nice to know how many headmasters actually want to take part in it?
So the committee notes the work that is being done in this arena and encourages the co-production between head teachers and the council, developing pathways and action plans, and requests an update on the progress to come back to the committee in September.
Sorry, just to clarify, I think it's that the committee is encouraged to learn of the co-production between head teachers and the council in developing pathways. That was the key bit that we were trying to square off. And then the reference to the update in September. Is everybody comfortable with what is being proposed? And is the seconder still happy with that? Is there consensus for that? Yeah. Lovely.
Sorry, with regards to the date that we bring that item back, we've tried to theme these meetings now, haven't we? Education and children's social care. So we're concentrating on one item at each meeting. So it will be the education meeting nearest to September. That would be fine. Thank you.
Okay, so school attainment and progress. I'm well aware of the time, and with many thanks to the officers who stayed this late in order to present this. Having gone through it and gone through my notes, the report wasn't quite what I was expecting actually. So it was more verified results around the SEND attainment and then that comparator nationally. So sorry, you're frowning, Sharon, but basically I'm just wondering, because it says about bringing it back in the spring, whether it's worth therefore clarifying again with Rachel on our forward work plan meeting about the data that we were expecting in here, bringing it back then all together collectively in the spring, because otherwise it feels a bit piecemeal, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think we had a conversation about the validated results, and I've got it on the forward plan to talk to you about when we meet. I think it's later this week.
Yes, it's not in
So
this
what-
report,
no.
so I'm wondering if it's worth, therefore, if the committee's happy. That basically what I'm saying is that this has some data around what we would call mainstream pupils, neurotypical pupils, and what we don't have within this is actually how are our SEND pupils doing, and collectively nationally in comparisons with their peers, etc. And it does say it's one of the recommendations that, you know, they're thinking about bringing it back in the spring when they have further information, particularly around looked after children. And I'm just wondering, therefore, if you would be happy bringing this back in March with a more fuller report where we can make some real comparisons and understand if there's a difference between how our SEND pupils are attaining and how the results they're getting at their schools, and you know what pathways they take versus their mainstream peers. So I didn't know how everyone feels about that. Does that need to be a recommendation?
So can I come in, Chair, just to say, obviously, what we've presented is a standard report that would normally be presented in terms of national provision. Yes, we can bring it back in spring, and I think you're looking for the virtual schools report as well. We can bring those back together. I'd have to check with officers whether there is a requirement to present this within any other democratic processes, and so whether we're actually linking them right. Do we have to take this one and or the virtual schooling timing into any other cabinet arenas? So it doesn't matter in terms. So yes, we can do that if that's what you would choose to do. I would like to just acknowledge the officers have sat here since 6 o'clock this evening to present this report. And so if we're not going to hear it, then I do think we should extend some thanks for them to do that.
I'm happy to do so. I'm not entirely sure what happened with the communication in terms of not having that data, and obviously I'll take that offline when I meet with Rachel for the forward work plan. But
it's because we would not put those two pieces of data together in one report, but we can put them in, put both reports into this arena, because the virtual school report has to sit separately, which is where you'll get the SEND report. But we can bring them together, but they won't sit in the same report.
Okay, I think that's one for offline. Sorry, Councillor Moriarty.
Thank you, Chair. At the risk of being controversial, I guess I will be in favour of, I appreciate it's late, but still doing this, because not all children have SEND, and a lot of children, you know, are kind of within this. And I think a lot of people would be interested in this. And I think especially since they couldn't be amalgamated anyhow, we are looking at two separate reports.
Yeah, I'm happy that if everyone's happy to, I mean, this is general consensus. If you want to hear that now, that's entirely fine.
I would like to say that, you know, they've sat here, I'm really interested in it, and the people have sat here all evening waiting. I know if I'd made a report and then was asked not to present it, I would be livid. So I'm looking forward to your presentation if we all vote for it.
Yeah, we'll just proceed as planned.
Thank you very much. The first thing is we don't do livid. We're absolutely delighted to be here, and in many ways we think that we're at the right point in the agenda. So the first thing I'd like to say is a huge congratulations to the children and young people in BCP schools from early years to 19 who, having gone through a pandemic, and one of the things that I think is commendable about the report is that it's something that has been co-produced. Our schools do not, obviously in early years and primary they do, but our schools do not have to share their Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 data, and they do, and they share it live and in time and help our performance teams to share that information back to them. They were presented with this information at the end of September, and we presented to chairs of governors. to say thank you for the efforts of the schools and of all of the children inside them and the families that support them, because these cohorts of children, whatever phase of education you choose, whether you're looking at our early years, whether you're looking at our children who were in middle schools, infant schools, Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, 4 and 5, our schools stayed open for the whole of the pandemic, and our children went through the things that all children went through in the area. And what they have achieved despite the challenges that they went through is fantastic. And that doesn't mean that there aren't issues, and there are issues encapsulated in here, but I'd just like to point out a few things. So first of all, it is about collaboration and cooperation that we have this information. It's also why, as Children's Services, we are very passionate about reducing exclusions, because look at what they do for the vast majority of children. There is a really good education on offer to lots of children, and that includes SEND children. So, for example, our SEND children in BCP outperform most SEND children in other parts of England. That doesn't mean there aren't issues to address, and that Anthony would raise quite rightly, and so would we, about how we want to do even better than that. We want to make sure that we narrow the gap between our non-SEND pupils and their peers, just as we are between their economically disadvantaged children and their peers. We want to narrow that gap. That's incredibly important to all of us. So usually when you go through this report, you'll be seeing that we're stronger or close to national in a number of areas. Some of the issues that we face are very similar to other areas. So writing, because they have been typing for all of the period of the pandemic, and obviously for some younger children, early years was closed for part of them. Some of them didn't access nursery in the same way, and so on. All of that disruption has led to some issues around writing, around reading. But one of the things that is really commendable about the education system and about the young people inside of it is they're not passive about those problems. So you've had a presentation from SALT around speech and language. And of course, there's been a big increase in issues around communication. You can see that in some of the early years results. But whether you're looking at early years settings, whether you're looking at mainstream schools, they are working incredibly hard doing what they can. And one of the things that Children's Services has done that is incredibly supportive is that when Dave said we have shortages of these key people, we're looking at how can we influence growing our own. So schools are offering placements for people on psychology degrees within the area in order that we might tempt them into becoming EPs. And AECC, which is one of our 3 universities, is starting a master's in SALT, which local people have applied to for this time next year. And that course is going to be filled several times over with local people. So we commend this report to you. You can see both the light and the dark of their experience, and we will certainly be happy to come back and talk to you and get into the weeds of where some of the gaps are within for other groups. But the most children who have SEND are in mainstream schools and do their examinations there. The thing that we're working on very hard together at the moment is where do we create pathways where there are groups, and we mean that slightly differently to when we mean in the clinical sense. So we're talking about pathways on from each phase of education. So you can hear that primary schools do a really good job by and large avoiding exclusions, and what they need is more help with behaviour training for their staff. So the big increase in children's behaviour issues can be addressed, can be dealt with. There are schools that can learn from each other in this regard. There are lots of schools that don't exclude to the same extent as others and still have good exam results. And that's one of the things that we've been commissioned to look into, and that Sharon and Kathy are encouraging us to put into the education improvement plan. And of course, I'm fairly sure that the committee also knows that where there are gaps, so for example, around send young people post 14 and particularly post 18, we grow our own interns inside of BCP, who we're now in cohort 2 of. So where there are gaps, we work together to look at what courses we put in, and that's something we're looking at with secondary schools. So if we've got children who've got difficulty with access English and Maths GCSE, how do we get them into functional skills so they can still progress into apprenticeships? And the early years system, I really recommend that you ask Claire, who's our primary and early years advisor, to have a look at her really detailed reports from early years, Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, because you'll see what some of the issues are and what the system is working together in order to do that. And I know you're very pressed for time, but if you've any questions that you'd like to ask us, we'd be welcome to answer them.
So I've got a number of questions that were written by Councillor Olivia Brown, who is a teacher and very well versed in these issues. The first question she had was, having spoken to teachers, head teachers, and more over the last few months, there is a definite anxiety as to how these pressures filter down into schools. Education is a statutory requirement, and head teachers in schools cannot refuse to educate these children. However, the delays are meaning that SEND children are in mainstream schools without EHCPs and funding in place. This is putting immense pressure on schools. What has been put in place to combat this pressure faced by schools? Oh, I apologise. That is the next paper.
Okay, look at the next paper, shall we?
Here I probably ought to declare an interest because I actually teach at a college locally. But I'm thinking about A levels. Sorry. Yeah. I'm thinking about the provision of A levels that's not at sixth form. So essentially, if you want to be in a college environment, you have to go all the way to Weymouth to do A levels. That's kind of a lot of kids would choose to go to college to do A levels if they were available. And any development, you've put that down for an area of development?
Yes, Georgia Pinder, our secondary advisor, will answer that question.
So as you are aware, Bournemouth Poole College made a decision a few years ago to stop offering A-level provision. They basically looked at the whole area, and their A-level provision was quite small within Bournemouth Poole College, and it wasn't the same quality as the sixth forms. So we have 14 sixth forms, mainstream sixth forms across the BCP area, and that's predominantly where our A levels sit. We do have conversations with the college about whether that will change. Their main focus will move to T level provision, which will be the equivalent of A levels. And so at the moment, as far as I'm aware, Bournemouth and Poole College are not going to change that offer. It is something that we talk to them about, because we are aware that for some young people that are moving from some of our schools that do not have sixth forms, they then need to make that decision, that transition decision to go into some of our mainstream sixth forms, and that can be quite tricky when you've got a settled cohort. And so we need to make sure, just like we do with primary and secondary and then secondary into post 16, that there's really good transition routes as well, so that young people feel really confident to go into those sixth forms. We're aware for some of our more disadvantaged cohorts of students, they tend to be our schools that don't have the sixth form provision as well. So that's another challenge for the area. But we work really closely with sixth form leaders across the area to make sure that we're looking at that. But you're right, children travel to learn, young people travel to learn to Brockenhurst College and to Weymouth College. So it is a gap. It's also a gap for our post 18 students. And so also working with skills and learning, adult education around that offer as well. Okay, point on the A levels as well. With SEND students, provision needs to be extended for disadvantaged students with SEND. Yeah. So at the moment, when you look at the data pack, I think it's in there, and also we have a wealth of data and information. We could bombard you with PowerPoints on PowerPoints, because as Julia mentioned, we are really fortunate. Our schools share an awful lot of information with us. We know that not enough young people with SEND and disadvantaged young people go into our mainstream sixth forms. So we need to be working with our sixth forms to think about how we encourage more young people to stay. For some of those young people, they are making that decision based on a lot of careers advice and guidance that they have as well, that they want to go into a more vocational, less traditional curriculum. And actually what we want to do is also celebrate those curriculums. We've got excellent apprenticeship offers at Bournemouth and Paul College. We've got excellent vocational offers. There is still a lot of uncertainty at the moment around applied qualifications, and so there is a defunding mechanism going on at the moment for vocational qualifications. So we are also talking to the government about what is happening longer term with post-16 education, because what happens is it's very hard for our school settings to then decide on their curriculum routes, and so schools won't recruit staff if they don't know what's happening 2, 3, 4 years down the line. And so that also is a challenge within post-16 education at the moment. But we've got excellent post-16 leaders across BCP. We've got excellent college leaders across the Pan Dorset area and into Hampshire, and we do talk to them, and we also link that into our skills agenda as well. So it is a challenge. We do need more young people to think about whether they want to study a traditional A-level route. But we also need young people that are in our mainstream schools to think about whether the college option might be better for them as well. So it's both of those things.
And it's one of the reasons why we do the Careers and Apprenticeship Show. So 14th of March, you're all very welcome. And we actually get SEND young people to help us design the entire event. They've designed the sign, the SEND part of the event entirely. They're doing a lot of the marketing. And and 3,000 children in year 10 and year 12 will go, and they will see a lot of the things we want to tempt them into, like working in social care and other jobs where we really need them to stay, come back, return to us. And 1,000 tickets are they're not on sale because they're free. But we invite parents, and we started with elective home educated, SEND, children in care, children who have a social worker were invited first. So from 4 p.m. on the day, people can come along to the event with their children.
Because as I see it, children's learning journeys, young person with SEND, academically, some absolutely fly, don't they? And saying that, then many can become disillusioned with the education system, and obviously at that age they can then make those decisions for themselves. And the sad thing to say was majority can become NEETs, can't they?
They can be, although our NEET level is lower than many other places, and one of the reasons for that is because teams work together. So obviously there's the prevention in the schools themselves. So the careers leaders in every single secondary school will try to give them the very best independent advice and guidance. A lot of it is children knowing that the quantity of opportunities that there are from them in the area. We build employers into all of the work that we do inside of children's services. So for example, the inclusion quality mark that people talked about before in relation to schools, the fact that we set up our own internship means that McDonald's is doing that, the JP Morgan do that with some of our very bright children who have got autism. So we've got lots of employers who want to join us in the inclusion quality mark, not just the schools themselves, because they really value the contribution that young people with SEND make to their businesses and to the future of the economy locally.
Can I very quickly ask, have you got any stats on those that have fallen through the gap? That's literally gone off radar.
Sorry, what has gone off radar?
As in SEND or children that have had school-based anxiety, things like that.
Sorry,
So
You don't
so you're asking about
young
our NEET
people.
figures? Are you asking NEET
Well,
figures?
neat figures and even those that really aren't
So yes, so we track our NEET
accountable
figures.
for. Yeah, tracking.
Yes,
Yeah,
so we've
that's
got
every
all the-
single
that's
month,
thank you,
yes,
monthly
thank you.
tracking figures for NEET, but we don't have them in front of us this evening. So
Yeah.
but we do have them. Yes.
Quick one, going back to the kind of early years type in the primary, I've noticed on the report you're kind of improving the timelines for educational health and plans and stuff. Could what are the stats around young people who are waiting for such an important time for them, isn't it? So I know you've got a shed load of work to do and that kind of a load of pressures, but it would be nice to know what those figures are. And are they broken down in wards? Is that easy to find out? So if you know wards across the conurbation, how many little ones are waiting and are in placements where they shouldn't be, if you like. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of ward data, yes, we break it down into ward data, and actually we use that at a cluster meeting and conference we held in October with over just under 200 professionals from health, preschools, family hubs and schools to discuss their ward data so that they were able to address those needs for the children. So apologies, was one of the questions as to the number of children awaiting to go to specialist placements. We don't have those figures here at present, Sharon.
There is a list of children waiting for specialist provision. That list is currently being reviewed, looking by phase and by sector, the length that they have been waiting, what their needs are, and how we can support them. We're working with our Bedford's sector-led improvement partner on that as well. It is actually in an action in the improvement plan, which we'll talk about in a tip. So that work is underway. Clearly, we do have some capacity issues, but also in that earlier intervention space, looking at just a conversation today, how we can better support and look at that positive transition into primary, including looking at the children that maybe have been held back a year and what does that mean for them. So that piece of work is happening. And then moreover, looking to in the future, how do we improve our provision through our local area Sencos, how they work with early years into reception, year 1, year 2, and that's part of our improvement piece of work. So can provide the information.
Thank you. Number one, would you mind emailing details of that careers fair you were talking about on was it the 13th of March?
No, 13th you can come along and help us set up. 14th it's all day at the Vic. During the day, every year 10, every year 12 in BCP, specialist and mainstream will all be there. And then from 4 p.m. onwards, we always do an Eventbrite ticket so that we can make sure it's all safe. And that's when often parents, carers, and perhaps people who've got another, a sibling who's in Key Stage 3 and they want to understand how apprenticeships work, but all 85 of, including ourselves, all the big employers are there.
Fantastic. And you mentioned that the home educated, group are invited. How does that work? Do you email parents there, or is that a letter that goes out?
We have a really wonderful elective home education lead, Lorraine Birchall, and we work with her all year round. And for those of us who work in the post-11 age group, we make sure that parents know that there's an offer for them. So we have to approach it very gingerly because everybody has a right to electively home educate their children. But because Lorraine is very collaborative It means that lots of people give her their contact details, and that means that what she does is she contacts them and has told them that that offer is there for them to be engaged in. And just because their children who are the relevant age aren't in school doesn't mean they can't go and get that information.
Fantastic. I was going to ask what the take up is. Do you know? Do you have any sort of figures? You know, the amount of children that are electively home educated?
We won't know about. We literally won't. The bookings open last week, so we won't know until nearer the time. But we do a very detailed evaluation, and obviously we do a check-in, etc. And there will also be the offer of voluntary further support.
Great. Thank you. Sorry, that wasn't actually my main question.
Oh, that's okay.
Really interested in that part. When I was reading the report, it struck me that it's something that is sadly known anyway, that preschool meal children are falling behind their peers in more than one subject and in most educational phases. We know that that's a nationwide issue as well. And I was reading a little bit around this, and another report suggested that it could take a decade for the attainment gap for disadvantaged pupils and their wealthier peers to reach pre-pandemic levels in England. And I was wondering, sort of as I was reading around it, one of the measures that I believe was in place to help address this was the National Tutoring Programme. That was set up to help children catch up on lost learning. So I just wondered, is this tutoring programme still operating in schools in BCP?
Nationally, it isn't.
Okay.
So what has happened with the National Tutoring Programme, and there were some of our schools, in particularly some of our most disadvantaged schools, that did use it to some good effect. But unfortunately, the publicity and the reality is slightly different. So we managed to get some really good tutors, but in the first phase of that, of COVID recovery, 90% of that was paid for by central government. That had reduced by last year to just 10%. So with the cost of living crisis, in practice, they couldn't afford to keep, because it's a bit of a vicious circle. So schools did use it, and they have shared really good practice that they got from it. But it was the intensity. If you also struggled to get it in certain subjects, but the key thing was that it went from 90% to 70% to 10% within 18 months. So it was very helpful while it was there, and the schools used it incredibly well. Unfortunately, last year they couldn't afford it.
I'm going to just stop it there if that's okay. Just my only point would be, Kathy, just last week I was at a specialist out of county school where year 10, year 11s, and year 9 parents were saying to the school that they didn't really have much input from their local authorities, which I think with BCP have got quite a few in terms of succession planning and moving onwards. And certainly they were saying, well, could we have a careers fair? And I was thinking, well, you can't do this. I mean, kids from all around the country. And I'm just thinking, especially in the environment and context of safety fair, we're going to be bringing more people in. I'm just wondering, can we make sure we send this out to our out of county provisions as well, please? So maybe this one escaped the net, I don't know. But also I'm just thinking also our year 11s, whilst I know with most of the phase transfers have been done, I still think there's some gaps, perhaps just to open up the offer and so they can understand what is on their doorstep without having to look elsewhere. Because if they don't know, then I think they will look elsewhere. Is that okay?
Yeah, so I think the intention of the team is always to try and make sure that we address and meet offer the apprenticeship career show to all the children who live in BCP. So if they are placed out of county, then we need to look at that, and I'm sure the team will pick that up. And I'm really pleased that the team have raised it, because it is a really good fair and it is absolutely worth people visiting. It's really good. It's a very good piece of work that the team undertake.
One of the things that Children's Services has enabled us to do is that it's now annual. So it used to be biannual. So going back to the year 11 issue, everybody in year 11 will have been to one.
I'm not sure those out of county placements would have done. I think that's just the gap. I'm just aware that we're going to be looking at changing our offering. So that'd be really good. And you know, and I support it completely because it sounds brilliant. And that's why I know that there's need and a want and for it. So thank you very much. The recommendation is that the committee note the outcomes of the pupils and EYFS, so early years to Key Stage 5, and obviously ask officers the questions that they have in terms of the contextual information they put, but that the education improvement team return later in spring term, which will be our March meeting, please, to discuss gender disadvantaged pupils and those who are vulnerable groups such as SEND or with experience of care. So is everyone happy with that recommendation?
Thank you. Just a very quick comment. It would be wonderful to see some of the stats. You said you've got figures on needs by ward. I don't know if that's something that you could give us.
Sorry, can I just wonder therefore, because obviously I'm meeting with Rachel this week in terms of the next agenda's sort of planning. So if there's anything that you particularly want in this, and then obviously the forward plan has the other agenda items as well, by all means, please feed in and then we can discuss it with Rachel, and that might be the best way ahead. That's right, Claire.
So the early years data is in wards, and that's where the children live. So it's just that early years that we have at present, and it's not from the school they attend, it's their actual home postcode.
Oh. Yeah. So everyone happy with that recommendation? Yeah. Thank you very much. Sorry it's so late. Send improvement update, which I think is Sharon, is that right?
Yeah. So the report, I'll take the report as read. It builds on the presentation that you had from me November time, I think it was. Whenever it was, I think it's November, maybe January. So it just identifies our progress to date. Just by way of update, the improvement plan that's referenced in the document that we have talked about tonight a couple of times is now with Department of Education. We're waiting for their feedback on that, and then we will obviously circulate and socialise that. We continue to work with our across the partnership, and all the previous work that we did around diagnostic has informed the improvement plan, and the improvement plan is working across, as we've discussed earlier, health colleagues, our school education settings, and then in and around BCS under the partners. We, as you know, we have a number of DfE advisors working in and across the service. Through Bedford Slip would be one, a good SEND local authority in terms of Ofsted Good. They continue to work very closely with us. They're with us, colleagues are with us on a weekly basis, looking at our plans, how to support our plans, high support, high challenge, very helpful for me just in terms of sense checking our thinking, looking at best practice elsewhere and taking the shortcuts wherever we possibly can for our children and people. We continue to focus on our partnership data set as a partnership system, and there is a new SEND scorecard that will be going to the next improvement board, which is on the 1st of February, and that aligns to the 8 new priorities that exist in the improvement plan that are detailed within. Preparation for adulthood is one, so there again we'll be looking at specific actions to make sure young people transition well to the next phase of education. In terms of the work we're now doing, waiting for DfE sign off to the plan, then mobilisation of the plan. We're not really waiting for sign off in the sense that some of these actions have been underway since November. We are seeing, as referenced earlier at the start of the meeting, an absolute improved grip in our timeliness for for education and healthcare needs assessment. We talked about 6-week decisions earlier. I am very proud of the team across the piece. Our education psychology service has been working incredibly hard to get our timeliness of assessments in, and they're now in a much more positive health. And we have weekly meetings across the department looking at children that are checking their progress. Referenced earlier in the meeting this afternoon or this evening was around those children that have faced a delay and where are we with those. So at the highest point, I think we had 251 children awaiting assessment. In the backlog, those are children that for various circumstances had missed their timeliness. That figure is down to 127 now, and we continue to focus on that. We have experienced some challenges around education psychology because we commissioned out some services to help with the backlog, and unfortunately that provider's not been able to fulfil the contract to the extent that we wanted it to. We have escalated that with their chief exec, and I meet with him on a daily basis at the moment to make sure that we've got the absolute telephone call. We absolutely have got the grip in terms of making sure those children's plans, our needs are addressed. In terms of the improvement plan and thinking around timeliness and meeting children's needs and working better with schools, we are looking at the pathway, so looking at where children are stuck. We are actively using complaints as a way to understand children's lived experience. What does this tell us about the system? For example, that's directly meant I've responded to an email from Anthony not too long ago, but others and across the system. And finally, we are developing with Rachel's support a new quality assurance framework, which I did reference last time, that allows us to look at both our performance data, quality of individual plans. We talked earlier this evening around the training and the workforce development work that's underway with our case officers. So significant work as outlined in here, much more to do, and involving some of our pathways reviews has identified how we focus on the child's journey and bring together our services a little bit more. So occasionally we've been quite siloed, and I talked about that last time. So there's an overview, much more to do. Performance data is improving, outcomes are improving, but we still have some children in the system that we know have experienced significant delays, and we will continue to focus on those children and work through those plans as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Councillor Harman.
I do. I feel like I'm asking lots of questions. Sorry. Just a very quick point of clarity. First of all, I obviously understand what an EHCP is. EHCNAs, they're health needs assessments. Do they come before an education, health and care plan? Just to check I got that right.
It's an assessment of need that will inform whether you have a plan or not. But you can have an assessment of need, and we might say you haven't met the threshold for a plan, but that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be some services and support for that child or young person.
Cool, thank you. And another question. In one of the slides in the presentation, when it was talking about discussions with parent and carer reps were held to help inform a snapshot view. I just want to understand a bit more about those the parent and carer rep groups, you know, how they are formed. Is that something people elect to be part of, or do you invite people? Is it a sort of a static number of people? Does it evolve? Because I think something that I'm learning in this role is that parents and carers really want to be consulted and they want to be part of the conversation. And I just want to make sure that BCP are doing everything possible to involve practically as many parents and carers as possible when it comes to the conversations that are affecting the futures of the children and young people we're making decisions about.
Okay, so it comes in many and varied forms. I'm going to forget the timing now. I think about October to December, we issued an annual survey to all of our parents and carers and through schools as well to say, give us your views. It's an annual process, and that allows us to understand how parents and carers feel about the experience that they've had. And it's also written in such a way it allows to identify those parents and carers that are going through the needs assessment process versus those parents that have got an established plan. And there's a young person survey as well. So that's one mechanism. We have a strategic partner, which is Parents Carers Together, who work with us and are represented at the SEND Improvement Board. And there's also Parents Carer Forum, who were here earlier this evening, and they're also represented at the SEND Improvement Board, and they represent and engage with other parent, carer and voluntary groups across the local areas, but also network regionally and nationally as well, to ensure that their views and experiences are heard. And as I've said, part of our approach more recently in terms of that lived experience is complaints that are coming in. We take that forensic look in terms of, so actually what does this tell us about the system, and what do we need to change and do differently? So there's a regular dialogue. So I meet with the both parent carer forums on a monthly basis. They have 45 minutes to talk through where they are, their issues, etc. And then above and beyond that, in the improvement plan, priority number 2 is co-production and communication. And there are a series of initiatives and plans where we've agreed to do things together in partnership to develop aspects of the system. So, for example, just this month, we've launched a new needs assessment process that was informed by schools and parents, carers together. So the specific pieces of work that would reach out to and engage with those structures so that their views and experience shape the plans and the activities and services. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that was really comprehensive, and it was great to hear, because my fear was that, you know, this consultation took the form of sort of just a paper questionnaire. And I'm really conscious that a lot of families that, you know, we desperately want to hear from and engage in that conversation are absolutely drowning in paperwork, because often, you know, there's a lot of complex forms that they have to fill in anyway, and they're doing it on a weekly basis, you know, if not more regularly. So it's great to hear that there's face-to-face things happening as well, and engagement events. That's good to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I've already asked it, but I'll say it again because messed up the timeline there. Apologies, sometimes the length of meeting conflicts with the ADHD and I lose track, so there we go. Having spoken to teachers, head teacher, this is from Councillor Brown, not me. I have not done this. I don't want to claim that I have done. Having spoken to teachers, head teachers, and more over the last few months, there is a definite anxiety as to how these pressures filter down into schools. Education is a statutory requirement, and head teachers in schools cannot refuse to educate these children. However, delays are meaning that SEND children are in mainstream schools without EHCPs and funding in place. What has been put in place to combat this pressure faced by schools?
Lots of things is the short answer. So we have the local authority has funded a series of activities to address the backlog, effectively to provide additional support in education psychology, and talked about some of the frustrations we have around that, but that's one area. And consequently then, as we're doubling up on plans, we needed additional business support in order to process the additional plans that were coming through the system. So we increased our administrative capacity in order to support that. We've also worked very closely with Bedford Slip in terms of just sense checking our thinking, make sure that we're not missing anything, we're doing things to the optimum for the outcomes for our children, which is why we all do what we do. So there is a action plan, and as I referenced just earlier, we have a weekly meeting, excuse me, looking at all those children, looking at the figures and the progress week on week for annual reviews that are delayed. Where were we last week? Where are we now? Same with our needs assessment. The other aspect of that is we did do a piece of work looking at vulnerability, so we could be clear around those children that might have multiple vulnerabilities, making sure that where we can prioritise, we do prioritise. We continue just to monitor that resource, have the weekly oversight that we need to have, but also there's a quality assurance activity which is checking that the quality of what we're doing is to the right standard as well. So it's not rushing to tick the box and miss the point in terms of the quality of the work. So there is a clear recovery plan in place, and then the improvement plan. The longer term piece of work looks to what parts of the system do we need to fix, either through sufficiency, through workforce development, through business support, to make sure that we learn from the situation we found ourselves in. The root cause of that, there are many things, but one of the things is the need to restructure our processes and our teams to better support our teams and provide greater stability. We've had a lot of agency staff come in, come out. That provides stress for families, stress for the system, and actually a new structure based on good and best practice elsewhere, which is what we will be implementing, will help address some of those systemic issues.
Thank you. I realised that was a very broad question. Thank you for your answer.
Councillor Martin next.
Just check earlier on, 53.4% of the EHCP requests rejected in this academic year or in the academic year. So what I understand is that is around twice the national average. Is this masking the progress that's that we're sort of saying is being made, sort of skewing a little bit? Sort of, I've got that right.
It's a complicated picture because of the fact that we're dealing with backlog cases. So children's needs may have changed. We might have to go back and understand those needs. I think in terms of understanding our relative performance, we need to get to a steady state towards the end. In all reality, because the way our figures are, it will be next September before we get a true position of decision making, because we're working through the backlog plans as well as the new plans, and it does potentially mask what's going on in a live system. But as I've said, we continue to monitor that. In terms of the decision-making panels, September through to December, we are working with our Bedford SLIP, our sector-led improvement partner, to look at the process of decision-making, the quality of the decision-making. Have we got it right? Do we need to amend anything? What does it mean for our workforce development? What kind of conversations do we have? And that's an iterative process, and we'll continue to do that.
Thanks, Moranti.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the provision of educational psychologists, and I believe it looks like we've contracted to some organisation called Sky Lakes, which, how am I right, are currently not fulfilling their contract. What redress have we got to deal with this? Can we have another provider? Better still, can't we do it in-house? You know, is there something that we can change to improve that?
It's the organisation that I referenced earlier. I suppose last things first, we've looked at throughput in a steadier system, and we have sufficient resources in our education psychology to meet the needs of education healthcare needs assessments. That isn't to say there isn't more that we'd like to do, but with the volumes that we have now in the system, we're able to meet in our education provision, psychology provision, and that's what that team is working on. What we contracted Sky Lakes to help with was those children in that backlog period that had incurred delays. Contract was commissioned over the summer with a commence date in September, and the Sky Lakes have been able to recruit the number of education psychologists in order to meet that need, and that's created then further delay. Obviously, we've escalated that, and as mentioned earlier, have weekly meetings with Sky Lakes. At the moment, I'm speaking with the chief exec every day, just to get a grip on actually where are we now. Recruitment of education psychologists is a national issue in the same way that speech and language we've heard about earlier, and social workers too is a particular cohort. In terms of growing our own, developing our own service, we will continue to do that. What we've got is that cohort of children who need it now, and that's why we contracted that organisation. We have looked at would it be better now to look at other options around what other options, other providers. It is a very, very challenged market, and actually to move on at this point might further damage those children's ability to get their plans met. So we are working closely. We have assurances from Sky Lakes that they are prioritising the work, and we are tracking the children that are with them, and we are seeing them coming through now, and they have recruited more, but this reduction period, so it's created a delay, but we're doing everything we can. Should we stop and move on? My concern would be we can't find other providers that could provide the education psychologists, and we're in the system now with Sky Lakes, and we can see that they are making every effort, and education psychologists are being attached to our children now, and we will work those through. Finally, we made a decision last week just to trade some traded income work with schools and not to do core assessments. So our education psychology team are also picking up some of those children that Sky Lakes couldn't serve. So that's maybe stopping some activities around training or support to schools that isn't directly related to individuals' casework. So we're doing everything we can to put our children first and increase the output for those children.
Thank you, Sharon. Could I just ask one supplementary? Am I being incredibly naive when I suggest that actually a lot of psychologists will work for agency because they get paid more? If you brought it in-house and paid them a bit more, would that not provide a far more consistent service?
It can in some situations, but it's also broader than that in the offer in terms of having the ability to do more than just core assessments and advices for children. So providing training and development opportunities, traded income, makes the offer. Sometimes not always there's certain agency workers that chase them, and that's the reality, and quite happy to do that. For our permanent education psychologists, they like the blend of the core work and the traded work. But we will look to see what more we can do in terms of retention, stability, etc. It is a national issue, as you know.
Thank you. I'm going to bring that to a close there. Thank you very much, and everyone, and thank you, Sharon. There is actually, yeah, there are. Sorry, go back to where we were. So I don't know if everyone's had a look at the recommendations. So A is quite self-explanatory. B, obviously, for it to come back once it's been agreed. And then obviously scorecard to come back terminally. And obviously to note the report from 2023. Yeah, you're happy? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Richard, sorry, stop you on your phone there. I had you. Okay. Yeah, okay. Had you given your complete portfolio folder update or just parts of it earlier?
Yes, no, I decided that because the agenda was quite so long that I will keep mine right to the point tonight.
So that brings us next to the forward plan. It's on there, and as I said earlier, we have got items of information, have we? Just to note that they were circulated, and as always, it's because there's so much work coming through, and we have to obviously commend the officers for bringing that work coming through, and this is things and items that we would ordinarily be asked to look at. As always, we obviously try and get them out to the panel early, and if there's any questions, then to through me, we can then obviously ask for either more information or clarification. I haven't had anything come through at all, so therefore, and perhaps maybe a week if there is anything. Obviously, some of the other items for our funding forms, etc., I think we've done to death really, but it might be some more queries that you have from that, from what you've heard this evening. Is that okay with everyone? Yeah, move on. Cool. Then forward work plan. So I'm meeting with Rich on the 25th, which I think is a couple of days' time. As always, please feel free to have a look at the forward work plan, or if there's anything else that you would like to have considered, or have some items that you would like to be included with some of the items that are already on the work plan. So, agenda, and then if you
just going to say that looking at your March agenda, you have got 3 items on there, 4 items, and given the length of the meeting tonight, and just to remind you that the ideal amount is 2 to 3 substantive items per agenda, so that you can do good scrutiny on each of those items. So just thought it was worth putting that reminder out there.
Thank you. And then meeting dates. Louise, I've been asked to note the last date of the 2023 minutes. It's a year. Just please note. Thank you for what's been asked. Note it. Thank you. The other date's been agreed with the council. Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that it's gone on for so long, but there's a lot to cover, and thank you for your patience this evening. Good night.